Ah, right, it works. Good evening, members. Please be seated. As members have noted, this is an extraordinary meeting, and the first apologies I would have are from my chaplain, who unfortunately is on holiday and was unable to make it, but I'm sure he's thinking of us. Let's get a few of the housekeeping items. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the back of the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Right, do we have any apologies for absence? Councillor Westbrook.
Yeah, apologies for Councillor Gary Watts.
Councillor Mrs Reid. Can you push it right in? Try the one next door.
It's okay? Yep, right. Try again. Councillor Elaine Steele, Councillor Robert Tate, Councillor Joyce Bowyer, Councillor Hayley Eachers and Councillor John Leake.
Thank you. Any more? No. Thank you. Any declarations of interest? No. Item 3, questions from the members of the public. We have none. So that moves us on to item number 4, which is the Greater Hampshire Working Together, which is the single topic for this meeting. We are going to stray slightly from normal procedures. You probably noticed that we have a different seating arrangement up here, and the leader and the chief exec will present the paper. Now, it's very important to hear everybody's views. We want to make sure that everybody here gets an opportunity to have those views heard and to make their points. Once the leader and chief executive have presented, we will go through the paper chapter by chapter, and there will be an opportunity for members to ask questions. Once we've got through the questions, the leader will propose and we look for a seconder for the recommendation, and then we will move into debate. So I will now turn to the leader and the chief exec to present the paper.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And indeed, thank you to everybody for coming tonight, because this has all not happened at what might be the ideal time in the middle of the summer to debate these issues. And there has not been as much time as any of us would have liked to have progressed to where we've got to. But we are where we are. We have no choice in the matter if we wish to continue to participate in the process. And therefore, you will have to bear with us. I'm afraid that some of the information will have got to you late, or possibly not at all in some cases. And we will try and make sense of it this evening. What we have in front of us now, which was circulated by email on Friday, I think, to everybody who was able to collect it, was the latest draft, version 6 of a proposal to go to government this week on the formation of a combined authority. A meeting was held this morning here in Basingstoke, which I chaired, of all the leaders and all the chief executives of all of the authorities in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and in addition with present the LEPs, the Fire and Rescue Service, the police, the 2 national parks and the NHS were all brought together. And at the end of, and we went through the whole of the document, and there have been a number of amendments made to it, a number of changes made to it, a number of, I think, hopefully of improvements made to it to try and crisp it up and give it a better sense of direction. We won't actually see the output of that until tomorrow or the day after. But at the end of that meeting, we went round the table, and all of the local authorities and all the others present all signified their intention to sign up to the document at the end of the week. Now, many of the local authorities have meetings like ours this evening during the course of this week. Not all of them, because everybody's taking a slightly different route through onto this. But that's where we've got to at the moment, that we have got another draft in process, which I think Mel will pick up on the main points of difference this evening as he goes through. But we expect to have a document which can go forward at a later stage. The point I would make about this document, before I ask Mel to speak on the details of this, is to remember that this is only just one more stage on a long process. Nobody is being asked to sign up to anything at this stage. These are ideas which are being put forward to government about things that we would like to develop as being part of a combined authority. Government will inevitably push back on some of those issues, will obviously want to change some of those issues, and a big negotiation process is in front of us before we actually arrive at anything which anybody will be asked to sign up for. It is very much work in progress. We are at an early interim stage. Even when, if we get to a stage when we feel that we are all, collectively, all of the councils, able to sign up to a combined authority, the combined authority, as it starts at the beginning, will not be the combined authority as it will eventually develop. You can see this already happening with Manchester, where they started with a number of powers. They're now starting to attract additional powers into it as they progress. It's an ongoing negotiation. I would fully expect that to be the situation with us. And each combined authority that has so far emerged has been different from the other ones. So there is no blueprint for what we should have or the way it should be developed. Each case needs to be dealt with on its merits. So that said, as an introduction, what I'm going to do is ask Mel to take us through the document, where it is, the background to it, and then some of the modifications that were made during the course of the morning.
Thank you, Leader. Members, good evening. We had an all-member briefing on the 13th of August, and those that attended, I think we had about 35 members attend. The feedback was positive, that it was helpful to have an overview in terms of where this kind of proposition has come from and where we've got to now. So what I'd propose to do is just to spend 15 minutes or so just to provide an overview in terms of where we are, not to repeat that presentation, but to actually draw out the differences, as the leader says, in terms of the key themes as they've developed in the last 2 weeks, talk about the timescales, next steps, and that will hopefully allow all members to feel comfortable that they're at the same place in terms of where we are in summary, before handing back to the Mayor to take us through the discussion on a chapter-by-chapter basis, where we can sort of drill down on those details. So in terms of this short presentation, this will talk about the context for devolution, what is a combined authority, clearly it's in the paper, but I'll put some flavour to that, why local authorities at the moment are competing with each other to develop up proposals, and we heard recently that there are 25 combined authority groupings proposing to make submissions to government by the 4th of September. So this is a process where we are seeking resources over and above what others might get. So we're in a competitive process, 25 combined authorities looking to develop ideas. Where we've got to in terms of Hampshire, Isle of Wight, Portsmouth and Southampton. The red lines that we've agreed both at Cabinet but also appended to the papers that you've got, and the broad timeline, because there will be some issues for us. If a proposal is submitted on the 4th of September, how will government give us feedback? When will we get that feedback? And what that might mean in terms of further negotiation and discussion, as the leader has flagged. So essentially, as on paper, the whole Scottish debate has really kicked this issue off. In terms of devolution within England, the government's approach is to avoid a top-down approach and to say we welcome proposals from groups of local authorities that are interested. This is both an opportunity and a challenge because the rules aren't clear, because they're bottom-up approaches. So it's about kind of defining what we think we can get and then negotiating hard to achieve that. The time frame has been brought forward, as members will be aware, and clearly that's very challenging across 15 local authorities and the other groups that we were meeting with this morning. And therefore, clearly, in terms of negotiating what we think is important, we do that in the context of working with 14 other local authorities and other public agencies as well. I thought it might just be helpful to just touch on Manchester, because I think it really got everybody's attention in terms of what's happened there, and just to talk about the powers that government have agreed to devolve, subject in many cases to detailed business cases being developed. And that caveat will run throughout a number of combined authority proposals that come forward. It's important to identify there are checks and balances along the way. So typically, a combined authority is able to take on transport, economic development and regeneration functions, and the Manchester Agreement takes on some of those, but it's been broadened out more recently. So let's just kind of skip through what Manchester have got. So responsibility for devolved business support budgets, control of grants relating to apprenticeships, opportunities to co-design and work with the Department for Work and Pensions in terms of the work programme, getting people back into work, one of the major programmes that the government has got. And the real eye-catcher, which stimulated interest in combined authorities when this was announced, the ability to work with health partners to design how health and social care can work together more effectively in the area comprising 10 local authority areas in Manchester. And again, the seriousness and the significance of this, we are talking about a budget potentially being shaped by the local authorities in Manchester of £6 billion per annum. Now, the caveat there is government doesn't just hand over £6 billion. It's all subject to detailed business cases that need to be signed off by Health, Treasury and so on. So that will be a continuing theme, that you agree things in high-level principle, but then you've got to make sure that the detailed business case stacks up and ministers are prepared to sign it off. So some significant powers there for Manchester, and it continues. So in terms of additional responsibilities they've got control of, multi-year transport budget, responsibility for franchise bus services, the opportunity to devolve rail stations located in their local authority areas to them, together with a statutory spatial framework where all of the leaders of the 10 authorities need to agree, control of a £300 million housing investment fund. Such is the way that these things work these days. It's a recoverable loan basis, but again, significant resources to drive housing delivery, and the opportunity to make the case to government where it's investing in transport infrastructure that boosts economic development to get a return back from that. And in the Manchester case, the opportunity to take on the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner. So in terms of a set of arrangements giving real and significant powers to the grouping of 10 local authorities in Manchester, we can see the significance, and on the announcement of that deal, a whole range of other organisations and local authorities across the country getting interested in terms of making a pitch to central government. If we just consider for a moment not just our position, but the position of our residents and what some of the drivers might be in terms of coming together in this way to form a grouping of people sort of working together on these agendas. One of the main drivers is supporting the vulnerable elderly residents of the borough, of the county and beyond. A couple of years ago, the London Borough of Barnet produced a graph that said, based on where they thought central government funding was going in terms of the reductions in central government funding, demographic changes in terms of more of us living to an older age, which is a positive thing, we must remember, that actually their budget beyond 2020 would be able to pay for no other service other than adult social care. and that became known as the Barnett graph of doom. They'd be able to do no other service apart from adult social care. So the pressures in order to kind of get together, to work more effectively together, adult social care is an absolutely key one. And that ability to work more smartly and integrated with the National Health Service clearly is a key opportunity. I think the reflection for us as Basingstoke and Deane with the responsibilities of a district council, whilst we're not subject to those pressures in relation to adult social care, they are our residents who may be subject to those cuts and reductions if we don't find better ways of delivering these services within the resources available. Another major driver for this initiative is around driving growth. So government is saying that it wants to stimulate growth, and it's looking for proposals from groups of local authorities in terms of how they will drive that growth, both in terms of economic output, but also in terms of the timing in relation to things like housing and so on. And one of the big issues for Basingstoke and Deane is around infrastructure. So in terms of the process we're going through, not just in terms of business space, but also in terms of housing delivery, there is a sense in which sometimes the infrastructure hasn't always been in place for the housing units that have been delivered. So one of the things that we've come up with, and we'll sort of talk about later, is this concept of an infrastructure guarantee. How can we, as part of negotiating government, as part of a larger whole, say to government, we want earmarked budget allocations within spending departments covering transport, education and so on, to make sure that the infrastructure is delivered in good time for any development that's proposed. And of course we take into account that a number of the things that we want to see delivered in terms of infrastructure would not just benefit new development, but of course would relieve and support existing residents as well, whether that's in terms of access or whether that's in terms of educational provision. And then just before I sort of start going into the chapters within the document that you've got before you, just one final comment really, just in terms of the ability to get into a process where different organisations are having debates and discussions with each other about the nature of services that are provided. There is an opportunity to rethink and think about which organisation is best placed to deliver what service. So for example, we've begun a debate about double devolution in terms of some of the services that perhaps we might be better placed to deliver than others, particularly in the context of cuts that are being made to the county council budget, where quite often we're faced with the proposition that we step in and support services to support existing residents. So there's a potential for a more proactive approach in terms of joining up services. But it works a number of ways, because of course there might be opportunities to further devolve to parish councils or local groups. Equally, there may be some organisations that have got certain delivery responsibilities now who wish to have them delivered in partnership or in different ways. And you'll see in the detail of the document, you've got examples where the unitary councils of Portsmouth and Southampton are proposing to develop a single adoption service with Hampshire County Council. So that's an example of, notwithstanding the fact they've got the power, actually there's an opportunity to think about doing things on a larger, more scaled up, sustainable way. So thinking about which organisation is best placed to deliver, or which groups of organisations are best placed to deliver. So if we then just start thinking about some of the substantive points in the document that you've got as an appendix, as circulated on Friday, as discussed this morning, as the leader said, just in broad high-level terms, if we just say what the chapters contain, clearly there's a lot more in the documents, and members will wish to comment and discuss that in due course. So the first proposition, and the ordering has moved from the all-member briefing. Members who attended the briefing will remember that housing was the first item. We've now got productivity, skills and business support as the first item, and very much taking the benefit of the learning from Greater Manchester. There's stuff in here about devolving responsibility for business support programmes, simplifying matters, being able to work in relation to DWP's work programme to have more control, and also seeking to support and have further control and direction over the funding of adult skills training. That's in the detailed document as well. So that's quite a big and a bold ask in terms of taking responsibility from the Skills Funding Agency to direct the provision of skills and adult training in our area. There's also a proposal there in terms of developing enterprise zones to support business development and growth, where there's an opportunity for a holiday in terms of business rates, and the opportunity to drive further economic development through that as a proposition. Secondly, we come to accelerating housing delivery. The first item there is all about infrastructure and making sure that we've got sufficient infrastructure to support any new major development that's proposed, which will also benefit existing residents as well. So what we're talking about here is a 10-year earmarked funding from central government in terms of how they would propose to support new development taking place within Hampshire and the Isle of Wight area, and of course Basingstoke and Deane would be a major player in that. There is then a reference to, in addition to the role of local authorities as planning authority and putting forward local plans and so on, there's still more work to do in terms of freeing up some land held by national government institutions not subject to local democratic control. How do we free up that land? How do we get the Homes and Communities Agency to work more effectively locally in terms of removing barriers to development and taking that forward? A line item here, the third bullet point, is planning fees are set nationally by government, and therefore we need to top up the costs of our planning service. We think that in terms of major developments we could charge appropriate fees which would allow us to get into total cost recovery, which would therefore allow us to have a planning service that was sort of staffed up to deal with major applications and to be able to recover that, and we think developers would be happy to pay. So there's an ask in there about actually giving us greater freedom to set our own planning fees rather than it being dictated to us from government. And there is an asking there for particularly some of the local authorities that still have their own social housing stock to have some flexibility not to introduce the 1% reduction recently announced in the budget and rolling that across to housing associations operating in the area. Infrastructure really is a big ticket item for us, so it really does cross a number of themes. So you've heard reference to it already in terms of supporting economic growth as well as housing delivery. So the investment in infrastructure, absolutely key. We're not just talking about roads and rail, we're also talking about educational provision, social provision as well. There's also the opportunity to think about how can we work more effectively together on the whole passenger transport agenda, and one of the issues that we're particularly pushing for is the ability to have more flexibility to generate funding to provide a greater range of subsidised bus services, which clearly is important for an area like Basingstoke and Deane. And one further thing that we've got in that infrastructure chapter that it's worth me pulling out in highlight is the whole issue about broadband. What we're sort of saying to government in the document is actually we want the provision of broadband on new development to be a material planning consideration. So that's one of the asks that we're seeking from government on infrastructure. The fourth item that I bring your attention to, which is in the document, is transforming public services. This is the area that I think when we had the all-member briefing, there was a general consensus that this was the thinnest area. We needed to do more work in this area in terms of how we join things up. And a significant amount of work has been done over the last 2 weeks. So this is talking about co-design in relation to health and adult social care. You'll see the proposal in the document that talks about a single adoption service for the Hampshire and Isle of Wight area, which is all aimed at reducing the amount of time it takes for a successful placement, as well as improving the cost effectiveness of the services provided. So that's an interesting proposal to be worked up. And of course we've got the devolution elements in there as well, in terms of devolving functions, and let's have a grown-up conversation with our eyes open about what can be delivered where, not just at our level, but also thinking about parishes and local community groups as well. I just want to flag one more significant thing before then talking about red lines and a bit of process. So, at the beginning of the substantial document, and we should sort of discuss it as you go through chapter by chapter, but you might want to discuss the other elements first. A proposition has emerged around, given that Hampshire and the Isle of Wight collects far more in business rate income than it receives from central government in terms of central government grants like revenue support grant and so on, should we propose to government that we will become more self-sustaining and seek the power to retain all of the business grant, all of the business rates collected in the area, and in exchange for that, say to government, you don't need to give us revenue support grant, both to all of the councils involved. Now, this will take a huge amount of detailed work to work through, so we should all be clear about that. One of the things that's interesting, though, and I'll talk a bit about just the how government is prioritising the sort of 25 that are coming forward. We get the impression that central government are quite interested in this as a concept, in terms of how can they start the process of redesigning local government finance, in the sense that we all know revenue support grant is only going one way, in terms of going down, and in some ways we could say the system is broken. So that's quite interesting, but will require a significant amount of detailed work. Can you not? No? How about that one? Can you read the one behind you?
That's the same I used.
It's a little bit closer.
Yeah, that's better.
A little bit closer. All right. I will just summarise. So broadly, this comes out of the Cabinet meeting that was held on the 28th of July, as was circulated to all members, and very important that the Council has been able to communicate to all of its partners where its non-negotiables are and its red lines. And so in broad terms, what we're talking about is that in terms of our existing responsibilities, we don't see that we'll be ceding those. There'll be no loss of control over our assets or revenue streams. That the benefits of economic growth must be captured for Basingstoke and Deane, and that what we're seeking to do is to make sure that this process improves outcomes for residents, and that a governance model that would be developed in due course, if appropriate, is one where all leaders of all councils have equivalent status in terms of one leader, one vote, and we don't get into sort of differentiated power structures. So that's what we sort of communicated to colleagues. Just in bringing it to a conclusion, before we sort of open it up, clearly we all understand that the timescales have been accelerated by government to provide an opportunity to make submissions by the 4th of September. As I've said before at the all-member briefing, we don't have to make a submission. I think the issue, though, and the learning from city deals and other sorts of proposals that have gone before us is, if you want to influence things and if you want to get the best deal, if you're there early, you have more flexibility as compared to when all the rules have been written by the civil servants in due course. So there's something about you have more flexibility to design things in the way that you want them to be if you're early at the table. Just in terms of recent discussions with the civil servants that are supporting the Chief Exec's group in terms of working at the proposals for consideration by political leaders, I think I would say there are 3 different timeframes going on here in terms of the proposals that are being worked up. There are 3 categories. We've got some that are fairly advanced, and it may well be that they seek to put proposals in place such that announcements can be made at the party conference season in October. I don't think we're in that category at all. We're sort of discussing proposals this evening. Category 2, the second category, is those proposals that are being worked up where officials would like to circulate the proposals that come in across spending departments, get feedback quite quickly, and if we think there's a strong possibility of them receiving support from government, there's the opportunity for a broad announcement at the spending review on the 25th of November. And I think broadly, Hampshire and Isle of Wight are in that category in terms of pace. The third category, so those that are thought to be less well developed, less coherent, perhaps needing a bit more work, wouldn't be announced at the spending review, but would have the opportunity for further work to be done and to be developed, perhaps to be announced in the budget in spring 16. So there are different sort of three categories that are moving forward that our civil service colleagues tell us about. In terms of process, a submission that is made on the 4th of September will be distributed very quickly to senior civil servants in the sponsoring departments. So where we're asking for things, education, transport, communities and local government and so on, and a response will be provided to the senior civil servants that we meet with on a regular basis, probably from about the 8th of September. They will work out how they then engage with us depending on the nature of the feedback that they've received from within government, and fairly soon after we would have a sense of what government think about the proposition that we have developed in terms of well, you can rest your pens, we're not very interested, we don't think that's ambitious enough, or we're very interested in that, we would like to support you in working up that detail, let's get negotiating over the detail so that we could make an announcement. So what would happen post the 4th of September, it goes into the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Greg Clark, it goes to the Chancellor, George Osborne, and it goes to Lord Jim McNeill, who's the Minister in Treasury, formerly of Goldman Sachs. Those are the three key folk that the proposal gets looked at initially politically, but of course it goes out to a wider section of departments than that. So, to conclude, the government is offering an opportunity to devolve a range of responsibilities which arguably should be able to be better shaped and delivered by organisations closer to their communities than central government departments. Clearly there are significant challenges in determining clearly defined propositions. They've been worked up, there's much more detail there now, but there's still more detail to be worked up, which would be the subject of negotiations post the 4th of September in the event that a proposal goes in. The approach that we've adopted at Basingstoke and Deane, both politically and managerially, is to get in and shape it rather than to receive something that's been worked up by others. And I think we all should be mindful of the fact that in terms of staged processes, that this won't necessarily be quick. There'll be a whole raft of negotiations and discussions to be held, and clearly before an organisation could enter into a combined authority, that would require a decision of full council, and I'm sure you'd want to be doing that in the event that there's a full proposal developed. So I hope that overview has been helpful. We certainly had some positive feedback from the all-member briefing. What I've sought to do is to move it on in terms of where we've got to in the last couple of weeks. There have been some significant changes in terms of more detail. I propose to pause there, hand it back to Madam Mayor, who I think will take us through on a sort of chapter-by-chapter basis, starting with Chapter 2.
Thank you. We are moving into questions. Is this a question on the process?
I was hoping that the Chief Executive would tell us what had changed today. Thank you.
If it would be helpful, Councillor, I think if we go through chapter by chapter, and at the beginning of each chapter, I could say a few words about what has been developed in terms of the latest discussions before you then get into your discussion.
Councillor Mrs. Cubitt.
Yes. Is there any possibility of us asking questions in relation to the slides that you've just gone through? Specifically slide number 4. And I think there was a slide, I think slide number 2, because there was some kind of like nice little kind of, this is why it might be interesting, for example, the adoption example which you cited. But when I kind of look at the slides, I'm kind of thinking, well, most of those are already the responsibility of the county council. So it might be juice for us in terms of a new area, but truthfully, our residents already have that covered explicitly and specifically by the county. Similarly, with regards to buses, that's already covered by the county. So I don't really see why that would be beneficial to us in this new devolved situation.
The presentation is intended to give you a sort of brief overview. In terms of the things referenced in the presentation, they're there in more detail in the paper attached to the report. I think it runs to something like 36 pages. And therefore, each chapter will have specifics in terms of what the proposal is in terms of the ask from government and what it's proposed that the authorities proposing to consider a combined authority would do. So we could do it on a chapter-by-chapter basis where members would have that detailed information in front of them. I think in terms of existing statutory responsibilities, of course you're right, and clearly part of the pushback from central government in terms of the negotiations that we will enter into is demonstrate what you're going to do differently or better from what you could be doing at the moment. And I think that the one about adoption is an interesting one, because I think one of the things we touched on at the all-member briefing was that movement of responsibilities or organising things in a different way wasn't just about devolution down, but it could also be devolution. It could also be a movement upwards as well. And I think that the adoption proposal is interesting because clearly a number of the smaller unitary authorities are recognising that they could probably organise that service better and more effectively by doing it differently and at a larger scale. And I think government will be interested in that in terms of how one can produce efficiencies and produce better results for the end user. So I think there's something about the opportunity to go through chapter by chapter, because it will be there, the detail will be there, and it will be easier for members to follow in terms of sort of page numbering and so on, if that's okay.
Right, I've got two councillors who've indicated they wish to raise questions. Are these questions that would not be covered by going through it chapter by chapter? Councillor Keith Watts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm actually on the map, which is before any chapters. Can we be quite clear what the boundaries of this combined authority are supposed to be? Because there's quite a lot of references to the M3 local enterprise partnership, and the boundary of that is the southern boundary of Heathrow Airport, not generally recognised as part of Hampshire. There's some very confusing references to what universities we neighbour, but I think that's a matter of detail we can sort out later. But do the figures in here cover an area that includes that local enterprise partnership? And if we're not doing like that, I mean, what's happening with the rest of the LEP? Are we giving them back to London or something?
Yeah, if I can answer that, Madam Mayor. The figures are purely for Hampshire. The boundary of the combined authority would be Hampshire. The fact that we have a LEP which goes across into Surrey is excluded for the purposes of looking at the deliverables and the figures that are being quoted within here. Obviously, one LEP, we have two LEPs functioning in our area. One is entirely within the Hampshire and Isle of Wight area. The other one clearly is not. There is no wish, I think, from government, or for that matter, from the LEPs or from the local authorities who form part of those LEPs, to see any change in LEP boundaries. We actually find it's a very useful thing having Surrey as part of the LEP that we're in, because it enables us to talk about some issues which are of absolutely vital importance to us, but they actually, focus around places like Woking and train stations and things like that. But the answer to your question very simply is the boundary is the county boundary.
Councillor Cousins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is in relation to page 9 of 53, paragraph 7.4. I know that the Chief Executive has given us a rough timeline, but I would like to try and push him a little bit further in how, or could he give us a rough estimation of when this would come back to us as members at full council?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I think it's difficult to give a precise timeline because we will await the feedback we get from central government to the proposal that goes in. What I've sought to do is to indicate to members that there are potentially three different speeds of moving forward, in that there are some proposals that appear to be quite close to getting over the line. There are some that inevitably will require a lot more time, and there's talk about no announcement until spring next year, and the clear potential for the Hampshire and Isle of Wight proposal to perhaps feature in the spending review, subject to the detail. I think the clear issue for us is that there's a proposition being developed to go to government. We then need to, if that's appropriate, to get feedback from central government in terms of what they are prepared to go with or not to go with. And in that case, there would then be a series of detailed negotiations before a more developed proposition was developed for consideration by the governance structures of the individual local authorities. So we're quite clear in terms of our advice to members that in terms of entering into a combined authority, that clearly needs a resolution from full council. So you would want to receive a more detailed paper with further worked up details, with provisional agreement that would be able to be achieved with central government, that you would then be able to consider before the council entered into that process. So there can be broad discussions about how long these things tend to take to set up. There can be broad discussions about when one would seek to, having made a decision of substance at full council, consult with residents and so on. But I think the important thing is we don't know how the proposal will be received until we get feedback from central government. And then we've then got a process to then consider as to, well, what do we think about that feedback in terms of moving forward. So I wouldn't say it's vague, it's just it's kind of dependent on other things happening as well.
Madam Mayor, could I add something
Yes,
to
sir.
that? I think try and address the issue which I think Councillor Cousins was trying to get to, but maybe skirted round. The way that it is envisaged that the progress of the deal will be negotiated is you cannot have a negotiation with 15 councils all in one room any more than you could have a negotiation with 60 councillors all in one room. And one or two people on the other side sitting there, it would just be nightmare. So what has been agreed amongst the councillors is that there will be a small negotiating group, for want of a better word, which consists of representatives from only 5 or is it 6 out of the main councils, which is, and for the Hampshire, Isle of Wight, Portsmouth and Southampton, so that's the 4 unitaries in the county. And then there are 2 representatives for the districts. There's 1 representative for the southern districts, and there is 1 representative for the northern districts, which happens to be me. And that would be the negotiating group as such. Now, there are clearly a lot more councils who also would like to be at the negotiating table, and will be demanding to know what was said, what's going on, where we've got to at that stage, in exactly the same way as I would expect everybody in this chamber to be asking exactly the same question and taking it forward. We are going to have to find a means of doing that. We have to find a means of doing that which is being as open as we possibly can, but recognising that we are in a negotiation, and you do not discuss your negotiating position in a public environment when the other side is busy watching your webcast to see what it is that you're about to ask for. And there is precedent for this. I know that, for instance, when Cornwall were negotiating theirs, they had several meetings, but they were closed meetings because it was necessary to discuss issues which would be difficult to discuss in general terms. We have to find a way through on this, whether we will add some closed sessions onto the ends of other council meetings that we already have scheduled to deal with this issue, whether we will have to call other special ones, or whether we can do it through group leaders, I think is a subject for we just need to discuss, so that we can all be happy that it's as open as possible, but I don't want to give away an opportunity to really strengthen our position by having too much discussion with the other side listening to us. So it's a difficult situation. I think you've got to, hopefully we can all work together to try and get to the best solution to this, but I can't say that I can give you the solution of exactly this meeting will be planned for this. And certainly, as Mel says, in terms of timing, we have no idea. And I bet some of it will go far too slowly and some of it will go far too fast. It never goes at the speed you want it to.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question, Madam Mayor, on the actual Chapter 1 before you got to Chapter 2. Just in terms of page 11 and the business rates and what the Chief Executive and the leaders said, I'd just like to raise a concern with...
Is this under Chapter 1? We will be coming to that.
You said Chapter 2, that was the reason why I'm stood. Yeah. Chapter
2, we're taking it a little bit differently. We're doing the 2, 3, 4 and 5 and then get with number 1. There are reasons which I'm sure will come to light. Right, I have been handed a piece of paper which I believe has some comments on about the recommendations this evening. Could I urge members, there are some questions contained in that, to raise them when we go through the chapters, and if any of the issues remain, then perhaps we could come back to those throughout the debate and then move forward that way. So we now move to Chapter 2, which is on page 13, and that's the number in the middle of the page. 25 of 53. Right, the Chief Exec is going to do an overview, and then I'll start opening the list for questions. Page 13, if you're looking at the number in the middle of the page, or page 25 of 53.
If I may, Madam Mayor, we have an ability to go through chapters, but somebody picking out a chapter in the middle of a document just does not make sense. And if there's a good reason, we're entitled to know what it is. Thank you.
Thank you. We met with 14 other local authorities and other groups as described by the leader earlier in the meeting, and we took the matters in chapter order of the substantive items that have been under discussion for some time. So those are the things about housing, productivity, transforming public services. What we've also got that has been developed more recently, although it's been under discussion for some time, is the proposition around financing and business rates retention. in previous iterations, it's been towards the end of the document, and there was merit we felt this morning, and perhaps I should have been clearer in terms of my earlier comments to the meeting this evening, about dealing with the substantial issues that people have been looking at for some time in terms of those broad chapter headings, but making sure that we pick up the finance item. And rather unusually, rather than having a separate chapter, it was kind of slotted in to the end of chapter 1, which otherwise is just a scene-setting chapter. So I thought there was some merit in going through the substantial headings, which would be 2, 3, 4, 5, but then coming back to the financing one at the end before we finish.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad that everybody understands. So we'll now move to Chapter 2, and the Chief Exec is going to give a broad outline.
Yeah. So just a very quick comment, Madam Mayor, because if members were comfortable with the approach, what I propose to do is to focus on any changes that were discussed this morning from the version that you've got in front of you. So broadly, this talks about supporting businesses, having a greater degree of influence in terms of programs of activity to get people into work, more control in terms of funding regimes for adult skills. The only discussion point this morning that came out was participants were concerned that, to make it clear that where examples were given of specific schemes, that they weren't exclusive. What I mean by that is there are lots of business support schemes, there are lots of initiatives running in different parts of our area, and just because they're not mentioned doesn't mean to say that they're not important or not to be included. And of course, one of the challenges you have in a document such as this, once you start listing a lot of initiatives in one particular area, then every area wants to list their initiatives as well, and then the document sort of explodes. So the only comment of substance that was made this morning was to say that where specific references are made, they're not exclusive because there's lots of good things going on as well. That was the only comment made now.
Thank you. Questions on Chapter 2? Councillor James, Gavin James.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two questions. I hope I'm not jumping into Councillor Harvey's view on the business rate retention, which does build up a certain amount of risk. Obviously, we owe our prosperity in Hampshire to our close proximity to the finance capital of Europe, which of course is London, one of the premier airports in Europe, which is Heathrow, and of course Portsmouth and Southampton are our docks, our gateway to our European partners. To take on 100% of business rate retention and base all our services on that financial income instead of any revenue support grant, we do have an EU referendum. Now, whilst I'm quite convinced everyone in this chamber will be absolutely supporting us to remain inside the European Union, has that risk been reflected in any discussions or debates so far? I do have a further question on a related matter, which perhaps I'll ask now. We talk about enterprise zones. Now, enterprise zones traditionally result in some sort of rebate or reduction in business rates for those businesses inside the enterprise zones in order to drive economic activity. Because we're now solely relying on, well, not solely, but increasingly reliant on the business rates rather than any revenue support grant, again, what risk analysis has been done in terms of, are we going to be very limited in terms of enterprise partnership areas, enterprise zones, given that we're so dependent on the business rate income?
Thank you. I'll start an answer on that, and I will just prepare the Chief Finance Officer to come in. So I'm just giving him a heads up there. So in terms of the detailed consideration about the outcome of an EU referendum, that hasn't received detailed consideration by the working group, so clearly we can note that comment. In relation to enterprise zones, we've been looking at the scheme as published by DCLG, and of course in terms of the scheme that they have been promoting of late, there's the opportunity for the funds that are foregone as an incentive for businesses to locate in that area to be returned back to the area through the local enterprise partnership. So one of the issues that we would want to see, of course, is a very tight set of arrangements between the local authorities in question and the local enterprise partnership. Things have moved on a little bit, though, because, of course, what we're starting to talk about, and when we get into it in some detail, is that whole issue of being more independent from central government in terms of the funding regime. So it's probably appropriate, given you've asked the question, if I can just ask our Chief Finance Officer, just to give members an indication of the level of resource that is collected across the wider area in terms of business rates, and the level of resource that is received from central government, because I think that will help to inform members' views. Are you happy to do that through the Mayor? Thank you.
Yeah, two things. I'll cover that bit at secondary. The first question was about the risk and risk assessment, and as the Chief Executive said earlier, there's a lot of work to be done on detailed assessments of proposals. But in general, if you see in the report, page 23 of 53, sort of last paragraph there, and I'll just read it out, but it has been considered in terms of risks to the system, and it says, in making this offer, we recognise that we will need to agree with government a series of caveats to protect both parties from changes to the NDR system. Now, that's getting at some of those risks where possible, and those risks are detailed in that. Some of those risks are detailed in that table. So, for example, revaluation, national revaluation of the rate system, transfers on and off the system. So, yes, some thought has been given to the balance of risk and how that, from both sides, that can be looked to be protected. As the Chief Executive said, on balance, there will need to be a view taken on the risk to the business rate system, however that is negotiated, against the risk to the revenue support grant system, and those are judgments that will need to be made. In terms of total resources, Hampshire as an area collects about £705 million worth of business rates at the moment. It retains, of that business rate, it retains about 261 million after tariffs and top-ups have been have been paid out into the system. And it receives about 245 million of revenue support grant. So current business rate and current revenue support grant equals about 72% of the collected business rates at the moment. So that's the sort of quantum that we're talking about across Hampshire. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mayor. My question is related, so it's good timing that I ask it now. Currently, the government, by the design of the local government structure and the regulations that apply to it currently, has to give us a rate support grant. They are currently, as we know, cutting it, and they have said that they intend to cut it further. But that does not remove, this is the preface of my question, by the way, but that does not remove our entitlement to rate support grant monies. We always have had an argument that we were entitled to business support grant monies because we were collecting business rates in our patch. To suggest that, as the leader does, that you don't give away your bargaining position when you say in here, we won't take any rate support grant. Just please give us the business rates. The reality is, you're giving away the biggest bargaining chip you've currently got, which is the entitlement to and the receipt of rate support, government, what do you call it? Revenue support grant. Now, I think that's a nightmare scenario, because the government will then retain not only the right to not give us rate support grant, but they will then say, by the way, the business rates need to be reduced, because they in turn will have the right to determine the level of the business rates. So I find it odd that we should be actioning government, I'd call it blackmail really. We should implement government blackmail. You want to take away our rate support grant? Off you go. Let's give it to you. I think that's wrong. And the reason I think it's wrong is because we're interfering currently with the structure of local government without any analysis, no Royal Commission, no academic research, none of that. And then we're tapping onto it non-responsibilities of DWP responsibilities, NHS responsibilities, and other such responsibilities that we won't have any money to spend. But apart from that, is that right? Is that right is the question.
I will try and answer it by saying the thinking that was behind it. I put to one side whether it's our inalienable right to have revenue support grant or not, because I think it's been very clear that it is being reduced, and indeed in our economic forecasting we've been planning for it to disappear totally within the next 5 years, and needing to make a provision for that. I think it's not just, of course, revenue support grant. It is also all the other forms at which money is passed down, which are not statutory in terms of they have to be there, including New Homes Bonus, for that matter. So there is a very large chunk of money which comes into the coffers of local government, which is not ring-fenced in any way. It's very often you don't know whether it's going to be there from one year to the next. This is seen as being a means of giving more security of our future income flow in a way that it is, in part, something which is then in our own hands to make it grow. So yes, there is more of a risk element in that if you don't make it grow. But nevertheless, you've got much more certainty in what you're likely to have and very much more control over what you're able to use it for, rather than somebody saying, well, you can have this for this bit and this for that bit. So that is the reason behind it. I have to say, I think this is going to be one of the real key areas that we will find government will push back on and will not want to give us. And then, well, I don't know where we go from there, but at the moment that is clearly what we want, because on the one side you've got a long-term plan, and this is the start of a long-term plan with a long-term strategic overview, and then alongside it you have an incredibly short-term funding system. There's a disconnect between those two which isn't right. We need to try and bring the two. You'll never get them totally in place. Nothing is ever forever, but it gives much more security, I think, in terms of the way that we will be able to plan both as a council ourselves and as a group of councils.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just on that point, I think there is a danger and a risk here and an opportunity. It's all wrapped up, and I see that in terms of the detail. The question would beg, though, if you put all your eggs into the singular basket of business rates, as Porter has said today, the new chair of the LGA, the level of funding for local government has been reduced to such a level now that service provision, just as you said in terms of the Barnet example, is such that there are services we would wish to provide and continue to wish to provide that we would not seek to be put at risk by the simple issue of whether or not they can be funded out of the central pot. That might be adoption services, social services, children's services, it might be the very basic services that residents most vulnerable rely on. The question begs, if you put all your eggs into the economic growth basket, that you must always generate economic growth, always be pushing for that, and all of the consequences that that then brings for growth being absorbed by communities as much as enjoyed and benefited from prosperity for communities, then you really risk whether or not you can consistently continue to do that. Can you square the circle in the way you describe? The point of the revenue support grant was always that it reflected the services that needed to be delivered by local government. These are two very different things we're talking about. And if you're entering into that negotiation with government, the risk is, as it is always, the cut, the take that government seeks to then take off the top of that becomes part of the negotiation. And the 70% might not continue to be the 70%. And also, the business environment in which we find ourselves may not continue to be the business environment in which we find ourselves. The European question that Councillor James asks is very, very relevant and pertinent. So there's a whole range to this, of which the detail we do not know. And again, that's a concern I would wish to register. May I ask a question on page 15, Madam Mayor, please? I'm really pleased to see the reference to Basingstoke at the bottom of the page and set squared, which I think is something that all groups have signed up to being very supportive of. I guess the question I would ask and the caveat I would give is that with both Portsmouth and Southampton having the pull of universities within the area, having the draw to their initiatives, research bases and so on, it is how we guarantee and how we can secure in the north of Hampshire, and in particular in Basingstoke, I'm putting Surrey to one side here, and the LEP relationship is important in that, how we secure that level of higher education, tertiary, that level of research in the way that we would seek to. I don't see the detail here, and that would be something I think, in part, I would be looking for, specifically on that point, how we can secure that against the real pull of Solent, Southampton and Portsmouth. They are bigger, powerful institutions that will draw to them this element if we don't have what we're suggesting would be, I think, a quite innovative and open approach, I think, in the north of Hampshire with the business community in the way you're describing. I think it is a concern. And I have a second question on schools, Madam Mayor.
I think absolutely right. I mean, there is a problem in making sure that we maintain balance here. I mean, one of the ways which it's been done is when you look at, for instance, Set Squared. The money for Set Squared has come through the LEP. So there is a balancing happening there already. But very clearly, there is a lot of detail about the way that everything will operate that has to be worked through. And there's quite a significant number of issues, for instance, around the delivery of degree-level education, degree-level apprenticeships, because there aren't any places that can award degrees in the north of Hampshire. And that's not just our problem, and it's a problem for a number of authorities right the way across the north. These are clearly written down within a document of this sort, which is just trying to get us over the hurdle and into negotiation. We have actually been through and taken out quite a lot of these examples. And so I think we have to say, in trying to achieve clarity, everybody's had to give up one or two things, but the point is not lost. The point is very clear. It's one which actually I think was in an earlier draft at one stage. We'll come back when we get into the nitty-gritty of the development of it, when it gets through to a much thicker document, as it must inevitably become. But I would agree entirely, and I'd be right there supporting the fact that that needs to happen.
There's another question.
And my question on really education and schools, it relates specifically to where the Chief Executive took the presentation really, and then looking for the detail in here. It should, I think, perhaps fit in this section. How and where it may do, I don't know. But a question really on schools. We've had the issue for many, many, many years in Basingstoke where the interests of Hampshire across the whole of Hampshire have not always put our schools in the best of positions or in the best of interests. You know, you average out across the whole, you don't specifically look at an area. Basingstoke would benefit from having that level of observation, level of involvement, level of engagement really in that way, and I think I would like to understand where this might benefit us in bringing our schools together in a way where we're either continuing to work with Hampshire. It is an excellent LEA, it is a superb LEA, and that should be recognised, but nonetheless, how in Basingstoke we address the Basingstoke education issues fitting within this whole agenda of employment and skills and learning and all of that is a part of it. And I don't see it directly, but for example in the renewal of school buildings, or in the employment and recruitment and retention of teachers, or in the development of programmes that we would like to see in our schools supporting children with disability or supporting children with special needs. Again, these are areas that should be considered if we're serious about the education point that the Chief Executive made. I don't quite see it in here, not necessarily that it would be in here, but I pose the question nonetheless.
Okay, if I can take that one again. I think this tries to do two things. One is it recognises that there is at the moment a disconnect between schools and the workplace, and we need to do more to join the two together. The constant complaint is that schools are not producing people who are work ready, and we need to identify why that should be the case and to put things in place. That cooperation, I believe, needs to be done at a very local level. It is not something that you can just impose on a broad perspective. And certainly one of the issues which is on the agenda for discussion as part of the double devolution debate is the degree to which involvement in the running of local schools can become something in which a local authority, the local district authority, should be involved. Now, we're not going to put it into this because it's part of the detail, And I think it would be fair to say this will be an area which we will have some resistance in negotiating. But equally, I think even amongst our local schools and colleges, there will be a willingness to participate if they were given the freedom to do so. So in some areas, we're pushing against an open door to get more involvement. In other areas, we maybe need to free up some of the school improvement aspects of it to become a little bit more engaged at that level. The answer is clearly not for a paper at this stage, but again, I think it needs to be, there's a whole list of subsidiary issues which need to be recorded and need to be put in there. When I say subsidiary, I only mean subsidiary to the level at which you're writing this, not that they are less important.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It starts on Chapter 2, but it's picked up in 4 and 5. So we've got references page 26 of 53, page 40 of 53, and page 45 of 53. There are two concerns over this pooling which is mentioned, which would mean that it's for our currently dedicated resources in these areas, would they be swallowed up into a Hampshire pool? You find it for all these sections on transport, economic development and transforming of public services. And secondly, the concept of pooling of resources implies that there's an additional tier of government is being created. Thank you.
Sorry, we're just debating on how best to answer the question. Let me take the second point about an additional tier. Nobody envisages there being an additional tier at all. In fact, the point which I made in the debates which we had about it earlier on is that my belief is that there should not be one single additional officer to run this. There should be no additional councillor allowances for being involved in running anything here. It should all be done with the existing number of people who are there, or maybe fewer, if we can find efficiencies. But there is no intention to have a higher level who is deciding things that then tells the existing levels what to do. Where there are references to various agencies there, those will be effectively committees of councillors from the constituent bodies, possibly with additional people who are involved in that particular sector involved in it as well, for instance the education sector, the FE sector, or whatever it would be, who would be involved in the process of looking at two things. One is developing overall strategy, and then secondly, where there are pooled funds, and there are some cases where it's a very good idea to have pooled funds, then looking at the allocation of that funding and where it would go in relationship to projects. I think each time there has to be a sound business case why anybody should invest anything in anything else. It has to be based upon business cases for doing things. But I would agree entirely, the last thing we want is to create loads of quangos or loads of new tiers which people go and pay themselves vast expenses for going and sitting on, this authority and that authority and any other authority. If that happens, then you can count me out of the whole process as well. I think that would be totally inefficient. Okay, there might need to be a secretariat if there is a combined authority committee, but that's saying we've got plenty of people to start secretariats in different parts around the country. There is no need to go looking for more secretariat to do that. So it should be, what it says, a combining of authorities, not an increasing or an adding of authorities. The point of pooling, I think it's a question of horses for courses. There are some situations, one of them, for instance, which is referring to an infrastructure pooling, which is actually not to look at infrastructure itself. And I think one of the points we picked up this morning in this was actually we need to find another title for it, because it sounds as if it's a fund to enable people to build houses. It's actually a fund that will be there to do the enabling work, the planning, the development of planning work to enable house building to be brought forward. And that is where, in some cases, there wouldn't necessarily be the funds available from the projects themselves to be self-funding. At that stage, it would make sense that there should be a degree of pooling. But you're talking about relatively small amounts of money in those situations.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Very brief question. Unless I've missed it, I can't see any reference to education of children with special needs and special educational needs, and I wanted to know why that was the case.
There is no reference, and I think we can helpfully note the Councillor's concern. In terms of responding to government's productivity agenda, in terms of this document, there's been a focus on post-16 education and training. Clearly, the point has been made earlier about connecting our school children into employment opportunities, and that's a broader point that needs to be picked up. But in terms of the document here, the majority of the emphasis in terms of adult skills and training has been about post-16 and adult training.
Just stand up, please.
Yes, certainly. I'm sure my legs will cope with this. I'm afraid I can't agree with you. I can't agree with you because people with special educational needs don't suddenly stop having those needs at the age of 16. They carry on right through their working life and to their death in many cases. So you haven't answered the question, though. I'm sorry. You know, it's a big area. It's an area of concern. It's an important area, and it's not mentioned.
Madam Mayor, if I may. I'm just looking for the reference in the document, and therefore forgive me if I don't point you straight to the paragraph. I'm pretty sure that there is a reference here about helping those furthest from the labour market, in terms of those people in most need, in terms of the support that they will require. So if you'll allow me through the meeting just to sort of look at the document, see if I can pull up the paragraph, but I think we would probably agree that... Has someone found it? Okay. Yeah, so there's a reference at the end of the paragraph at the top of the document to providing help to those who are furthest from the labour market to find and sustain employment. And I think in terms of how one would approach this area of work, clearly those with special educational needs will tend to be in that category furthest from the labour market.
Councillor Mrs. Cubitt.
Yes, thank you. Just also in response to the query just made, there's also references on page 46 of 53, which is all to do with the business case for health and social care. Anyway, I'm sure all councillors accept and acknowledge that all of the councils involved in the negotiations and Hampshire County Council already has huge priorities in terms of adults and children with special needs. I'm certainly involved in a charity and was extensively involved with a school that's based in Basingstoke, so I'm sure that they won't just suddenly no longer be cared for or considered in an important manner. But the query that I wanted to ask was, where I'm confused, and it kind of relates to the question that I made earlier, we're talking about transport delivery, and specifically page 39 and 53, strategic transport connections, and what I'm confused about, and also the reference to the pooling of...
I think you're referring to Chapter 4. We're still on Chapter 2.
Okay, well, I was looking at, and I actually was also talking about the pooling reference, which we were talking about. How do we get to talk about the pooling reference then? Yeah, we were talking about page 40 of 53.
So,
One
well,
of the
chapter
early
2 goes from 13 to, the big figures, 13 to 20.
Okay, I thought there was a reference talking about the pooling of infrastructure spends.
You pick it up when you get to we get to that chapter. Right. Oh, Councillor Putty.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For Chapter 2, how well placed are we to take on new responsibilities over skills, further education and apprenticeship? And do we have evidence to help demonstrate the impact we could make?
In terms of taking that work forward, I think there has been concern for a number of years that in relation to skills training, readiness for work, providing training support that meets the needs of employers, that the existing system has not been as good as it might be. I think the challenge for the area will to be able to work closely with businesses to be able to better define what the needs of businesses are, and I think there's a sense in which through better engagement, not just through the local enterprise partnerships but directly with businesses themselves, that the area will be able to better define than the National Skills Funding Agency. This is a significant area, and again we shouldn't underestimate the amount of work that would need to be undertaken to be able to sort of demonstrate the evidence in terms of where existing programmes should be changed or bent to be better aligned with the needs of businesses. So further work would be required.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just on that point, can we just be careful? Because I think, BCOT is renowned for its relationships with business and the quality of work that it goes on with young people in the post-16 sector. I would also highlight that, the Vine has an extremely great relationship with Fujitsu. So this is not a zero-sum game, and I think we've got to be careful in how we approach this. There is not some gap, some amazing gap between employers and schools. What there is a coordination of that, and I think that should be the focus. The language we choose to use here, I think, is very important. We shouldn't talk our schools down, and we shouldn't talk our local colleges down in relation to what they do between business and education. And that isn't the sole purpose of education, can I just say, simply to turn out people to work. There's a lot more that goes into it than just that. But I just want us to be careful with the language, that it doesn't float into this in a way that we do ourselves a disservice because of the quality that we do actually see in our borough.
I didn't quite find the question there.
Do you agree?
As we're going through the discussion, we're sort of picking up some of the issues that are being raised, and I think there's probably something about trying to make reference where we can, where we make reference to building on excellent existing work, but then improving elsewhere, because one must remember that this is a Hampshire, Isle of Wight, Portsmouth, Southampton document, and of course the excellent work being done by BCOT perhaps is the sort of work that others would wish to replicate elsewhere in the wider area.
Right, I have no more questions on Chapter 2, so we move on to Chapter 3, and I'll ask the Chief Exec to update us. Sorry, that is on page 20, the big number in the middle of the page.
Thank you, Mayor. So that's page 20 and 32 of 53 in the bottom right-hand corner. There was quite some discussion on this chapter this morning, so there are some changes for me to update members on. Essentially, the issues were around the issue about accelerating housing delivery and what does that mean in terms of timing. Issues around the primacy and sovereignty of local authorities as local planning authorities, and issues around how we might support processes in relation to some of the changes in terms of seeing development through once permissions have been granted, and discussion around sticks and carrots in terms of dealing with developers, as well as the changes to social housing rents and some other matters. So quite a few things. So I'll just pick up first of all, in your document on page 20 in the middle, 32 of 53, halfway down the page, fourth paragraph, you've got a statement in bold about accelerating housing delivery that talks about 76,000 homes 2026-2024. So the drafting that had been done on this late on Friday evening, there was some further reflection and a thought that we could just kind of tidy up that wording. So if I can just read the revised wording to that bold wording, just for members. So I'm reading the bold beginning of fourth paragraph. In return for sufficient commitment from government on infrastructure and land release, Hampshire and Isle of Wight will accelerate housing delivery, completing 2 years early the local plan commitments of 76,000 homes by 2026. So basically, it's just trying to find an easier construction of the wording that says the numbers that are agreed in local plans to 2026 to attempt to deliver them by 2024. That's what that's seeking to say. So that was a clarification discussed this morning. Other clarifications discussed, including if I take you to page 35 of 53, top right-hand column. So that's page 23 in the centre of the page. So this is one where we were sort of talking about asks from government in terms of what happens in the situation where planning permission's been granted but there hasn't been delivery, where a number of authorities are facing this issue about deliverability and building out. And there was a reference there to asking government for the freedom to be able to charge council tax on sites where developers, having received planning permission, hadn't delivered them within a year. And there was a discussion around that and a sense in which we need to stay with that theme, but there needs to be a recognition that on some very large sites, delivery takes place in phases. You don't just get a permission on a large site and it's all there after a year. So there was a discussion and some wording will be sort of tweaked around that. If I take you to the bottom of that same page, so that's 23 in the middle, 35 of 53, there was some discussion around a number of stock-holding local authorities wanting the freedom from government to say, although the Chancellor announced in the budget, in the recent budget, his intention for social housing rents to be reduced by 1%, clearly to reduce the housing benefit bill paid by DWP, that the freedom and flexibility was requested to not reduce those rents by 1% and instead to use those resources to support the delivery of affordable housing. So that's a provision that's being tweaked in relation to that point there. I think the other point that I would just wish to make, which is a more general point on this section, there was some concern that those members that are close to these issues will fully understand that the role of a local authority as it relates to being a local planning authority has primacy in relation to planning matters in relation to housing delivery. But there was some concern that that wasn't clear enough in the document. So a lot of the things within this section are enabling and to facilitate delivery either post planning permission being granted or trying to support land being assembled so that delivery could take place. So there was just a sense in which that there was a proposal just to kind of strengthen the wording, just to make sure that people aren't confused, that when people talk about housing delivery agencies and so on, that they are usurping the role of a local planning authority. And that speaks very much to some of our red lines in terms of the local planning authority role as well. So I think those are the points that I'd bring to members' attention in relation to Chapter 3, accelerated housing.
Thank you. Councillor Miss James.
Thank you. Can I just ask for some clarification, Mel, in relation to the bit that you talked about in the bullet point, in bold, in relation to the local plan? I didn't quite understand it. And what I want to understand is, because later on in bold it talks about an additional 500 units a year, which is over the 10 years, we're talking about additional 5,000 units across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. Taking away the 2 years from our local plan, what would that mean for Basingstoke? Is that more housing or less housing? And what will happen in relation to our housing land supply? I just need to understand that in relation to the local plan and the programme that we set out for delivery. And if we then bring forward, accelerate everything, and then leaves us for 2 years shortfall, where are we? Because we're going to need a 5-year land supply. So are we going to need, how many more houses, I'm asking, will it mean for Basingstoke and Deane?
Thank you. So essentially, what this proposition is stating is that all the relevant local planning authorities have been through their normal democratic processes to move forward with their local plans, and therefore it's not looking to usurp that process. But what it's saying to government is, if you give us that infrastructure guarantee, so we can put those roads in, those schools, those doctors' surgeries and all the rest of it, we would be prepared to try and accelerate the delivery of those numbers that we've got identified in our existing plans to that period, and to deliver them 2 years early. Now clearly that raises the prospect of the opportunity to subsequently review local plans in due course. Of course it does, but what it's not looking to do is to change the numbers in aggregate terms that have been approved through democratic processes in terms of local plans. In relation to the 500 units, that's extra and above. And what's interesting about the 500 is that, one, there's a reference there to housing numbers in rural areas, but also housing in relation to support for elderly people as well in terms of extra care. So there's a sense in which accelerate what you've approved through your democratic processes, and we're sort of talking to the long term there, 2026 to 2024, but we're also then talking about some additional on top of that in terms of rural and extra care as well. And of course, within the numbers within the local plan, you'd get some extra care anyway, but it's talking about that acceleration and then offering up to government some in addition as well.
So in relation to that, and in relation to the MPPF, will the combined authority usurp the MPPF in relation to the 5-year land supply? Will we still get a challenge, as we do at the moment, that we have a shortfall of housing in those last 2 years of our local plan? Or are we saying to government, we don't need to deliver if we choose not to deliver in the last 2 years of our plan? I just want to be clear, so we're very clear and understand that process.
Yeah, so there's nothing in the combined authority that usurps our role as the local planning authority. That's one of our red lines, so we've just got to be very, very clear about that. What we're saying, though, is because we know that government is encouraging of early delivery in terms of housing supply for reasons that we all understand. So what this is saying in terms of our opening negotiating gambit to government is we want a very significant infrastructure guarantee from you. In return for that, we will look at accelerating the delivery of the numbers in our local plan. In terms of how that discussion then progresses, in terms of how that moves forward, and at what point it might be opportune to undertake a further review of the local plan. Well, let's see, because we've got to go through that local plan adoption process, as I think we all understand. So what this is saying is that government, you are encouraging us to improve the deliverability and the timing of supply. What we are saying is, in order to have a chance of doing that, we need significant infrastructure investment from you. And we've termed it an infrastructure guarantee. What we mean by that is allocated budgets in the budgets of spending departments on transport, education and so on. And that's our push to them to see what we get back in that regard. But there is nothing in this proposal that usurps our role in terms of 5-year land supply and all the rest of it, in terms of our role as a local planning authority.
Thank you. Councillor Golding.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On the same point, I was also confused by the rewording. Although this talks about local plans through to 2026, our local plan, as we all know, goes to 2029. So are we saying that all the houses that we've planned through to 2029 will be brought through to 2024, or does the 76,000 only include the part of our plan that runs up to 2026 and exclude the bit from 2026 to 2029? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
There was an or in the question.
Well, I suppose the point I would have made was just that this is part of 15 local planning authorities having different dates in terms of their local plans and so on.
I'll just add,
Yeah.
try and add something to that. Is the reason why it talks about 2026 is twofold. One is that is one where there are, I think, in place mostly plans that we know are going to be there for that period. It's also because what we talk about is a 10-year infrastructure investment guarantee, and therefore the two are over the same period. So it's saying that if you give us the money over a 10-year period, this is what we can do within a 10-year period. In our particular case, we have another 3 years that runs on after that. And when you think about it, I mean, we cannot totally control the delivery of housing. It does depend on whether people wish to build it out or don't wish to build it out. Now, there are references in here to measures to be taken to encourage the building out of housing which aren't on sites that we actually control ourselves. So that is there. There are, it would certainly be the case that when we get to the mid-2020s, probably 23, 24, we would, the latest, we would want to be reviewing our next plan for the plan period from 29 through till 45 or whenever it might be. Now, what we don't know at that stage is what the housing demand will be at that period. So we can't say whether or not the remaining 3 years, I mean, it might be that our housing demand might actually drop if the population does not continue to grow at the same level that we are at. That is a subject for discussion at that stage. But as far as the figure is here, it is simply that 76,000 refers to the number of houses which are planned to be built, given the rate of annual rate of housing in each area from now until 2026, and not anything else.
Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We'll get a chance, I think, in due course to discuss the so-called infrastructure guarantee and find out whether it's actually going to be worth the paper it's written on, obviously. And obviously, I know there is reference to that later on about infrastructure providers, who I see as being developers. I don't know who all the rest of those providers are going to be, but we'll return to that if we may. Councillor Golding has covered one of the points I was going to make about the variance in terms of the local plan completion dates. That apart, I'm intrigued by this calculation of the additional 500 a year, the 5,000 over the 10-year period. I don't know where that comes from. I mean, is that purely an arbitrary figure? You know, could it be higher or lower than that? I don't know how that's been calculated. And to be frank, looking around the area that we're talking about, apart from Basingstoke, I'm not absolutely sure which other local authority is going to provide any or all of that 5,000 over that period. I mean, has any constructed thought gone into that? I don't know where that 5,000 comes from. Is it based on some formula that we're not aware of?
Thank you. I would refer you to page 35 of 53, which is page 23 of the document itself. This has had an interesting gestation in terms of the 200 rural plus 300 extra care. What was interesting, I think, in terms of the working groups to consider the housing issue was that we had colleagues from rural areas wanting support from central government in terms of rural exception sites, in terms of delivering additional housing. So that row, the penultimate row on that page, talks about 200 new rural affordable, and then clearly that's grossed up over the period as part of that contribution. So that's seen as a rural initiative. And then there was a sense in which it would be helpful to talk about some additional low-cost starter homes, and that was a figure that was produced which was felt to be sufficiently achievable, notwithstanding that it was produced quite quickly in the context of readying ourselves for negotiation with government. So they were thought to be numbers that were sufficiently able to be accommodated in the raft of activity that would be moving forward. Interestingly, both of those propositions came from areas that might be surprising in terms of housing growth, particularly in terms of the rural affordable and the extra care.
Well, that's intriguing, you know, and obviously we'll wait to find out a bit more about that. But in terms of our contribution to the 200 rural affordable homes, I mean, presumably you offered the possibility of us building south of the M3 on that, I guess, did you?
Councillor Harvey.
Clearly, the normal planning process will apply, and these are numbers across the wider Hampshire and Isle of Wight area.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I take it politically that wasn't offered because the leader didn't stand up and suggest otherwise.
I do hope we're not going to try and play, you know, clever games here. It was interesting, as Mel has said, that there are, unlike us, a number of local authorities who are quite keen on seeing further housing development in their area if the method for delivering it can be unlocked. There are two particular areas. One is this rural affordable housing. The other is the issue of land currently in government ownership which is not available. There are quite substantial amounts of that land. There are some authorities who are desperately in need of additional housing but can't do anything about it because they don't have the land available. Part and parcel of this is for government to intervene to release that land to produce it. We haven't actually offered anything to anybody as far as sites are concerned. I think we are already doing as much as it's realistically we can be expected to do, particularly if we bring forward delivery of some of the sites. I would imagine that most of the burden of delivering these will actually fall elsewhere, but will fall elsewhere with people who want to receive it. And they, after all, have signed up to this number as part of the process of going around the room today.
Thank you. My question specifically really relates to what has been said in the 5-year supply, and just trying to get our heads around this. We have a local plan in which, in draft form, in which significant proportions of the greenfield sites have already gone through the planning process, have already been approved, either on appeal or otherwise, and are coming forward. And they will come forward within the 5-year future forward view of the local plan as it currently stands. That will eat up huge chunks of the number which is agreed within the local plan over the whole of the whole plan period. If you then accelerate the later elements, and I would be interested to understand which later elements we're actually talking about in the context of Basingstoke and Dean, which later sites are we now talking about, considering everything's just shoved up the agenda and shoved up the timescale, that then leaves us, even then, because we have it now, with a 5-year housing land supply problem. We do not solve that problem through the local plan. The local plan and the 5-year housing land supply are separate entities. And in that context, the self-fulfilling prophecy, the concern here is that we literally write into Basingstoke's next 15 to 20 years a consistent 5-year housing land supply problem. Therein, we offer a free-for-all to the developers for the next 20 years to do what in the world they like by bringing sites forward in other parts of our borough where we would not wish to see development, because we've had various views expressed on that through this current local plan process. What I do not see is the connection between that self-fulfilling prophecy, that 5-year housing land supply problem, the level of supply we've already seen come through, accelerating what's left at the end, and then what do you do with the tail end of our plan? And if you review the plan halfway through, you will face developers bringing forward additional sites. You will enter into a whole new site selection row halfway through the plan on new sites. And can I just remind members, it wasn't only, was it this week or Lender last week, we got the updated SHLA with even more sites being put forward. We're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy here, if we are not careful, that will not be in our control, or even in our local planning authorities' control, unless the government are going to offer up a complete exemption on the 5-year housing land supply. And they're not going to do that, are they?
I think we're in danger of confusing two things. I mean, the 5-year land supply problem is not directly related to the housing number in the local plan. And therefore, any decision to bring forward stuff because you've actually got hold of the infrastructure which permits a development to take place sooner rather than later. And there are some sites in the, I can't remember which ones they are specifically, which by provision of infrastructure you might be able to deliver at an earlier stage to meet this requirement. You would still possibly be doing that or not doing it, depending on whether the developers who own those sites choose to develop those sites out or not. The same thing equally can happen if they're not developed out. It's still a question of whether you've got the land supply. We are going to, by the time you get to being within 5 years of the finish of your local plan, you're going to have to look at the next plan and work it out. And that, again, is not going to resolve the issue of the 5 years, but you've still got to go around identifying sites which you want to put in for that following 5 years. The speed at which those sites then come through, again, is slightly outside of our control. We can't decide when when a particular developer is going to bring a site forward. And who knows what the economic conditions might be at that particular moment in time. So you don't know when that is going to happen. What this is saying, I think, try and put it as simply as possible, is here, government, if you want to have more housing, or you want to have housing delivered more quickly, you have got to put up the money for the infrastructure. It's as simple as that. Without the infrastructure, you don't get any more housing, and we cannot have any more housing. We are not going to go around building housing and then on a promise that somehow or other that money is going to turn up at a later stage. So it talks about an infrastructure guarantee. That guarantee has to be a guarantee, and not warm words about, oh, you might get this in the long term if you do this and if you do that. That's subject for negotiation. We've got to see the whites of their eyes on that particular one, but I can assure you it is a view which is shared by every council who is facing that particular problem. Don't trust the government to actually deliver on these things. Don't trust any government, because who knows which government it might be by the time we get to 2026. So we have to make sure that we have got something which is cast iron in there in terms of delivering this. But I mean, there is always going to be a problem, and I'm not sure it will go away, about the question of the 5-year land supply. I'm not sure I accept the premise that this actually makes it any worse, provided you go through the effort of looking at what that 5-year land supply, it could be by the time we get to looking at this in the mid-2020s, or other people get to looking at it in my particular case, that we'll be seeing a housing demand which is going down because populations have not grown as much. That's equally a possibility. It does not inexorably mean that we have to see an ever-increasing housing demand. So I think there is a disconnect between the two. I accept that it's a difficult area. It's a difficult area to get really clear. It's a difficult area which, in some circumstances, this proposal slightly avoids tackling in detail, because it needs to avoid tackling it in detail until we see exactly what the government is prepared to put up as the other side of that balance.
Councillor Keith Watts.
Sorry. The last thing the leader says is the opposite of what I'm going to ask. Because I think, I mean, I agree with Councillor Harvey's concern. I don't think the leader's got it right, actually. But I don't want to debate it now. Can we set up a separate session with some specific data to talk about this issue? Because I don't actually know where it's written down what the scheduling is of sites other than Manydown anyway. So I don't think it's correct, and I think there is a direct relationship with the figure in the local plan and the 5-year supply. I might be wrong, but can we take it away and have a round table discussion of this with actual data in front of us?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think this is exactly the sort of thing that we need to be doing more work together on. I mean, there are figures which I believe, but Mrs. Primacombe can probably inform me on this subject through you, Mr. Mayor, that there is a rough scheduling which officers have of when they believe sites are likely to come forward in the local plan. But, I mean, that is only their interpretation of when that might be. I don't think anybody could ever predict exactly when sites would come through, other than those which are under our own control, where we can influence that process.
Councillor Phillimore.
Yes, Madam Mayor. In the original presentation by the Chief Executive and the last point on page 35 of 53, we're talking about the freedom from the requirement to reduce council rents. What we have to realise and acknowledge is there are people that are genuinely on housing benefit, who are on the minimum wage or affordable wage, that are going to suffer from this. And does that mean this additional affordable housing is going to be paid for those people on benefits?
Thank you. In terms of the proposition that's come forward from stock holding authorities, and clearly we're not a stock holding authority, but in terms of the widening of the wording to encompass housing associations operating within the area, if such a permission was given from central government, then clearly there would be a benefit in terms of generating additional resources. Of course, any additional new housing would be for those responsible for allocating to new housing to determine those that are in priority housing need in terms of those who would be nominated to those new developments. So clearly I think it's hard to say precisely whether people who would be nominated to those new units would be on benefit or working but still fitting a priority which got them to the top of the list to be nominated to those properties involved. So I think it's too early to say.
Right, I'm at the end of the list of questions on this chapter. So you, Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With regards to unblocking the government-owned sites, what we see on the paper here is commitment, but have we got the tools to do it? And also, coming to our housing ambition, will our strategic housing ambitions will be changed, and what have we seen at other places achieve that we would be able to replicate?
Thank you. There's been significant discussion on this item at the working group, and reference is made to the One Public Estate initiative funded by central government, where work has gone on to try and release public sector land owned by either the Defence Establishment Organisation on behalf of the MOD or properties owned by the Ministry of Justice, for example, where concrete examples have been delivered. And some of the learning from that has been that there can be very early high-level commitment, but when you then work through the practical processes and the legal documentation and so on, it can be a very long and drawn-out process. And an example was given to me of a deal only recently done involving Ministry of Justice property, which was vacant, where the high-level agreement was achieved some 2 years before it was actually possible to actually conclude the transaction and to have some beneficial activity on that land and property. So I think there are some big issues in terms of getting that land in question more under the influence of locally elected politicians who have an interest in seeing the land being brought forward for beneficial use. And I think there's some positive things coming forward in terms of, for example, the NHS has created a new property organisation with a new chief executive who has said that she wants to have an asset management plan for every surplus site within a year. Now, that might not sound much, but at least it's a commitment from someone at the top to say, actually, this is an issue for us. What's also helpful for us is that government are interested in turning some of those surplus sites into cash, so that's helpful as well. But I think we've got to work quite diligently in terms of coming up with streamlined processes so we minimise the amount of time it takes to actually take a vacant site into something that's used for beneficial economic use. So there are lessons that we can learn from other places that we'd build into the approach.
Right, no other questions. Can we move on to the next chapter on 26 in the middle of the page or 38 of 53 at the side? And I'll ask the Chief Exec to update.
Thank you, Mayor. Reference has already been made to the infrastructure guarantee. No change to that this morning, save for, I think there was a recognition that in relation to some significant schemes of infrastructure improvement, that there would need to be some significant work carried out to develop the evidence base to actually make the case for where some investment would be required in certain circumstances. So I think there's a sense in which, again, if we think about it, Hampshire and Isle of Wight wide, there is a sense in which there are areas where people have a sense that there is an infrastructure deficit, but they haven't done the technical work to be able to then make the case for, well, this is the price that it would take in order to ameliorate that deficit. So I think it's important to say that. And I think that then speaks to another point that's been made earlier this evening around collaborative working and in some cases pooling resources to make sure that we're using scarce officer resources to get the technical work scoped and carried out so that we can price the work that would be required in order to take that infrastructure forward. I think that also speaks to how one would deliver up a strategic infrastructure plan. So you would have something over a period of time that identified what would be required and by when. There was a specific request to link commentary around flood defences that you'll see in the document to opportunity sites. There was a sense in which it'd be helpful for Portsmouth in particular, where there was an example where some work that would safeguard development land against flooding from the sea could actually bring forward development opportunities, and about incorporating that within the documentation so that government could see the link between infrastructure investment and outcomes that they would wish to see. There was a significant amount of discussion on better defining the rural broadband issue in terms of dealing with that last 5%. So there's a scheme at the moment that talks about getting 95% of folk up to broadband, but we know that doesn't mean a deficit of 5% in certain areas. That deficit will be much greater. So there was a sense in which people really wanted to push that. And there was a sense in which, although it may be difficult with government, that there's a bit more work needed to be done in relation to energy and feed-in tariffs and so on. So that was the discussion this morning, where people will be thinking about how they can tweak some wording around that.
Councillor Mrs James.
Thank you. Mel, in the presentation you talked about our ageing population in Basingstoke and the benefits of a combined authority. My question is in relation to page 29, where it talks about the national concessionary travel scheme is significantly higher than the bus subsidies. But it then goes on to talk about previous consultations indicate that many older passengers will be happy to contribute towards the cost. Have we done that piece of work in Basingstoke? Are we saying that in Basingstoke older people would be happy to make that contribution? If we have, is it possible that we see that piece of work? And I'd like to also understand, can you explain, because I thought as an authority we were spending more on bus subsidy than we were on the concessionary travel. So I just want to understand that, because I thought as an authority we were spending a lot more. So I'm not sure this statement is relevant to us. And I want us to be aware that we have an older ageing population. It's going to be higher than the national average, than anywhere else in Hampshire. And so are people in Basingstoke, older people in Basingstoke, actually signed up to this? And how are we going to consult? Because one of the concerns I have within the document, it talks about having a conversation with, and I just hate that word, having a conversation. Are we going to consult with those older people and ask them, are you happy to pay for your travel?
Thank you very much. So in relation to the document and the questions that you've put to me, in relation to a view that some people may be prepared to make some contribution to the funding of services, that's something that's a point that's been made to me by the Transport Authority. So I'm happy to ask for if there's been any specific consultation in relation to that, and if I get that, then to circulate that in relation to that point. I think in terms of the second point, in relation to how such an approach might work and what does that mean in terms of subsidy levels and cross-subsidy and all of that. Clearly what is in this document is saying to government, clearly there is a national scheme in relation to concessionary fares. Would government support us in terms of making changes to that national scheme which would allow us, if there was support, in order to provide some financing that might be able to go towards the provision of additional subsidised services where no subsidised services exist at the moment. So this is about saying, at the moment, yes, people benefit from 100% subsidy, but they may not be able to actually use that ability to travel for free if there's no service that they can access. And therefore, can we explore with government how we could do things more flexibly, in that if the subsidy were something less than 100%, if there was support for that, could that be used to then finance additional services that people may be able to benefit from? There is also an element in here which is also talking about providing the flexibility for the local area in terms of Hampshire, Isle of Wight, to be able to cross-subsidise in a different way services that require subsidy. And that's the reference to passenger transport executive light, if you will, in terms of just saying we want to be able to engage and get those freedoms from government. So, of course, before one would enter into that process, we would debate, discuss, see business cases, and of course we would need to actually ask local residents what they thought about that. But the proposition is, could one provide services where there are no services at the moment? I think that's the key issue.
Councillor Keating.
It's been answered, Madam.
Oh, right. Councillor Keith Watts.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm looking at page 40 of 53 and the reference to a passenger transport executive. I'm rather obsessed with passenger transport at the moment because Stagecoach introduced this week new routes without consultation in my ward, and there's a nightmare going on. But I was really encouraged when it was suggested that double devolution could mean that this council, as one most interested in passenger transport in Hampshire, could take over the functions of the Passenger Transport Authority. That's what I thought was going to be on offer. As soon as I saw this reference to a passenger transport executive, I was filled with alarm. And what I was intending to ask, would the leader assure us that this passenger transport executive would not be left in the hands of the current dysfunctional Passenger Transport Authority known as Hampshire County Council? Now, the leader has since said that he doesn't believe any more posts should be created or any new tier. Now, if we're going to go on a major move to set up a passenger transport executive, which I would support, then we've got to go and get the best people in the country to run it. And I'm sure there are a number of other things in this report that other members know about, to which that applies. We can't just cobble together and ring-fence posts to people who don't know what they're doing anyway at the present time. So we do, if we're going to have a passenger transport executive, incidentally, this was where the metropolitan counties started. Does anyone remember Selneck? The Greater Manchester Authority was built on a passenger transport executive called South East Lancashire, North East Cheshire. Maybe that's the sort of thing that could happen here. But we've got to have proper professionals running it and proper councillors overlooking them. And I could see Councillor Keating smiling. He knows what I'm talking about.
I'm not quite sure where the question was there. Sorry? Oh, do I agree with you? Yes. Yes, I do. There's no point in having organisations that can't perform. And to get organisations to perform, you're going to have good people in them that can perform. I'm not going to get into the discussion on the people who are currently performing. It would be totally inappropriate to talk about individuals' performance. But I think probably the answer to your question is that, at least under this structure, this would be a combined authority passenger transport group in which we would actually have a voice, where currently we have no voice, or very little voice, in the way that the thing operates at the moment. And in fact, in looking at the way this will be structured, the intention is that there should be more freedoms for more local decision-making in the process to take place than currently takes place. And certainly, I mean, one of the things which we have discussed at great length, I don't know how practical it is that you have a situation where Reading runs its own buses because they were exempt under the 1984... Thank you. I was 1 year out. Under that Act, whether or not there's an opportunity here to negotiate with government to get a similar kind of freedom that we could look at it as an alternative, because we are, alongside Portsmouth and Southampton, we're the third biggest conurbation in the area, and we need to have a bus service which is appropriate to being that.
Councillor Regan.
Yeah, buses. One question is that you talk about putting a charge onto bus passes. Does that mean they're officially putting a charge onto disabled bus passes?
I think my discussion with colleagues have been that this is talking about older persons and not about people with disabilities, but clearly it's at an early stage, and I can't imagine that colleagues would want to move away from that.
Councillor Cousins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Page 28 or 40 of 53, the middle box, second paragraph, implement a managed motorway regime. First of all, for information, the phrase managed motorway no longer exists. They're called smart motorways. And I would ask if consideration has been given that there is joined up thinking along the whole motorway network. For example, the works going in progress in the M3 at the minute mean that junctions 14, which is Eastleigh, to Winchester 9, will have all 4 lanes open. 9 to 4A, which is the bit that we sit in, will have the 3 lanes open, so no hard shoulder running, and then 4A to 2 opens itself back up to 4 lanes again. Can we ensure that this is properly signposted, managed and brought forward? And can I ask also, have any safety considerations been taken place when 63% of the public feel unsafe using a smart motorway system where the hard shoulder is in use as an active lane?
I think we're in danger here of getting into too much detail on specific proposals. I'm not decrying the fact that we need to get into that detail when one comes to look at those specific areas, but that is not really something which I think is going to be debated in that detail when looking at the overall proposal for a combined authority. It did come up this morning in discussion that there needs to be much better coordination between what is going on the north of the M3, the middle of the M3 and the south of the M3, and that actually whether they're smart or managed, at least I can understand the term managed, that is when you have a near capacity on some roads, that's the only way to go, because you can't keep building everything out all the time. There will be limits to be able to do that. We also had discussion that it's not just the motorways, but the A34 is a key artery, particularly for accessibility to the ports for the Midlands motor manufacturers and others, and that road it's now getting very close to capacity at certain times of the day. There may well be an argument for widening the carriageways on the A34 in certain places, if not along the whole length. The problem is that not enough work has been done to produce an evidence-based case on all of these situations. That work has to be done. That will be part of the detailed work that needs to be done going forward. But at least we are now starting, as a result of this combined authority initiative, we are starting to talk about proper joined-up thinking, where previously it's always been pockets. And it's joined-up thinking not just because we as local authorities are thinking about it, but because we are putting in as part of our demand that government gets the various agencies, the Highways Agency or whatever they're now called, to be involved in that process, so that we get, hopefully, cross-government cooperation as well as vertical, and both vertical in terms of the geography and in terms of the organisation structures.
Councillor Potter.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I just return to the infrastructure guarantee issue? And it's not like me to be cynical, as you know, so I'll try and restrain myself. But in terms of this guarantee from government, which is going to involve obviously billions of pounds, difficult to calculate just how much really, must just be me, but I can't quite work out what's in it for government really in terms of the supporting the housing delivery and promoting economic growth that we're describing. At the same time, we're saying to government, at local authority level, we'll keep the business rate, so the economic growth is going to benefit the local authorities, not central government in this regard, so billions of pounds to be provided to underwrite that infrastructure. But they must want that money back in some form or other, and I'm just trying to work out how that comes. The other thing as well, there's reference in the document on page 26 to councils having the power to prepare a statutory area-wide strategic infrastructure delivery plan, which sounds to me to be a very substantial and complicated thing to prepare. This is area-wide, not just for Basingstoke and Dean Council, of course. So, you know, a massively complicated piece of work. Some thought must have gone into it because it's described in this way. Are the local authorities involved in this discussion confident they have the resources in-house to prepare such a document, or is this going to be another example of massively expensive consultants being employed to prepare this? Because, you know, clearly that is more likely to be the case, isn't it? And what sort of estimate are we talking about regarding the employment of those consultants? I know what it is likely to be even on a large-scale site like Manidown, so goodness knows what it would be for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight as a strategic document. I just wonder whether any work's been done on
that. Thank you. In relation to the infrastructure guarantee, clearly it's a pitch for government to identify the resources that will allow government development to happen. Part of our pitch to government is that if they invest here, they'll get more output and outcomes than if they invest elsewhere, and therefore we are in a competitive process. So clearly what we're looking to say to government is we want to work more closely with you and your departments in terms of thinking about that long-term infrastructure planning so that you are aware of the opportunities, so that when you make those strategic funding allocations, you are clear about the benefits that come back not just to this area but to the country nationally. So clearly that's about cost benefit, that's about evidence, that's about saying that you've got a group of authorities willing to come in together and to ensure that things move forward and are delivered. We'll have to see what sort of response we get to that from government, but what we're saying is we're laying out clear ideas about how government can achieve its objectives by being smarter and more targeted and more focused with the budgets that it has available to it in relation to major infrastructure. In relation to the strategic infrastructure delivery plan, the sums of money that we talk about when we talk about infrastructure for an area as significantly sized as the Hampshire and Isle of Wight are clearly going to be significantly large. And therefore, in terms of seeking to influence government in terms of those funding decisions, serious evidence-based work will have to be carried out in terms of why those priorities should be taken on board by government, what is the nature of those schemes in terms of their scope and broad costings before one gets outline approval, before one then undertakes further detailed work. And therefore the idea of a strategic infrastructure delivery plan is about saying to government, we're serious about this. It's just not putting in a comment that comes from left field. We're saying we'll undertake serious and studied work. In terms of how that would be resourced up, well, we would have to scope that out. And as the comment has been made, I mean, there are times where one has to look at the balance of in-house resources and the balance of out-house resources. But I think the important thing is that we can win more resources for our area to get the infrastructure that we need, not just to support any growth and development that may happen in the future, but also to benefit existing residents. And I think in order to win that investment, we'll need to do that serious work to demonstrate the evidence as to why that resource should come here rather than another part of the country.
Right, I have no more questions on that subject, so we move on to the next chapter, Chapter 5, Transforming Public Services. Ask the Chief Exec to update us.
In terms of this section, we've got a chapter here that has been developed significantly in terms of integrating health and adult social care. There's a major challenge here in that the proposal is around developing a business case in relation to the integration of health and adult social care, and we know that there are going to be challenges working with government in terms of the level of accountability they wish to see when they're talking about devolving significant health budgets. One of the comments made this morning, just in terms of fine-tuning the chapter that you've got in front of you, was just about there's been some good work across our wider area in relation to personal care budgets in terms of supporting vulnerable people, and it would be helpful to incorporate some of that within the documentation.
Right, Councillor Sloaney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The question, I obviously applaud some of the work done in here. However, I have one concern. We know that nationally, young people and mental health has escalated over the last 2 years, and yet there's nothing in the report about mental health. And I have concerns it'll just be swamped under the heading health, and that should not happen. I'd like to see us actually have some separation between health, as we know it in a general hospital, and mental health, because I think mental health gets lost along the way. So I'd like to have that, please, in any future papers we receive. Thank you.
I take it that was just a comment, not a question. Councillor Miss James.
Thank you. Page 34. In relation to mobility, at the moment we have a Hampshire-wide health strategy, and we have in Basingstoke wards of deprivation where men are dying 7 years earlier than areas that are not in deprivation, and women are dying 5 years earlier than women that are not in deprivation. So we are all signed up to a health strategy across Hampshire. What is the difference that a combined authority is going to make? How are we going to ensure that people in Basingstoke, and that is they are dying 7 years and 5 years higher than the national average? So it's not the Hampshire average, this is the national average. How are we going to ensure that this new combined authority is going to make a difference, and we're going to ensure that people don't die earlier in our town because of health and social care or whatever it is? We don't really know what it is, but we do have a health strategy. So what's different about this?
Thank you. In relation to page 34 of the main document, 46 of 53, in terms of the table insert, top row, it sort of takes the approach adopted in Greater Manchester and talks about co-designing health and adult social care. Now, there's a real challenge for us here because, of course, the proposal that's intended to move forward subject to the political process that the leader outlined earlier makes reference to something going forward on the 4th of September. Now, we know that in relation to the budgets that were involved in terms of this redesigning health and adult social care in Manchester, that equated to £6 billion per annum in terms of encouraging and indeed forcing a greater degree of cooperation and joining up across the local authorities and the health sector. Now the challenge there is that in order for Manchester to get that, they acceded to government's request for an elected mayor. So in terms of whether we will be successful in getting this, we will have to see. But the ambition here is to say that this isn't just about coordination between separate organisations. You get a deeper level of engagement and cooperation if people are working on in the same budgetary envelope. And so what we're sort of talking about there is that greater and deeper integration through that mechanism. Now, of course, in terms of co-design and developing a business case, that has to be based on the priorities. So one would need to feed into that process the particular priorities and nuances from across the area, so that fine grain wasn't lost in terms of that large-scale approach. But it would be a step change to be undertaking that joint planning on the basis of a joint budgetary framework, all subject to a business case. As I said at the outset of the meeting, this is not about Treasury or the Health Department letting go of significant budgets just because we think it's a good idea. It's about how you do the work to evidence that it will be delivered better, more effectively, through joining those services up. So that detail would need to follow on, subject to what feedback comes back from government in this regard, because that is a significant ask in terms of co-designing across health and adult social care.
So in relation to the question is really, so why would Isle of Wight not get, why would we get more money? Because those issues around health are more significant in Basingstoke than anywhere else in Hampshire. Even in areas of Portsmouth and Southampton, if you look at that, what's happening in relation to that, some of that data. So how are we going to ensure, will the system allow for areas to get additional money taking away from that budget? So are we saying that one area will get more or less as a result of their need on an evidence-based approach?
I had the opportunity to speak to a senior Treasury official who had been seconded to the Cabinet Office and worked on the Manchester negotiation. And I think the question we'll get from government, and in particular from Treasury, is not just about more resource, but demonstrate how the resource will be deployed more effectively to achieve better outcomes, to achieve better value for the public purse. So I think there is an issue about identifying need. How can things be organised better so there are better outcomes for the individuals concerned at providing better value for each tax pound that is spent? And that forces the issue about saying, what are we achieving at the moment and how could we achieve it better by working more closely together across the sectors.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm interested in page 37, Chief Executive, on delivering a single adoption agency. I'm interested in how you think that will pan out against the competition from the private sector, and what do you think Hampshire and Isle of Wight can do to get back some of the business that's gone to the private sector back into something more sensible?
I think it's very early days in terms of the proposal. I don't think I can comment in all fairness in terms of how the proposal will compete with alternative provision from the private sector. I think that in terms of the way that the proposal has come together is a reflection that in terms of 4 separate organisations providing upper tier children's services in relation to adoption, being Southampton and Portsmouth, which are relatively small unitaries, Isle of Wight, which is smaller still, and then a relatively large county. I think there's a sense in which they can organise themselves better to achieve better outcomes, both for children that need to be placed in supportive households and the ability to provide resilience in terms of running those services compared to services that can be very thin in some of the smaller organisations at the moment. So I think their starting point is, if they look at what they've got now, they could do it better. Clearly, moving forwards, I'm sure there'll be opportunities for sort of benchmarking as the business cases develop, but I think the proposition comes from, in terms of the individual organisations as they are arranged at the moment, they themselves have come together and come to the view that they could do it better.
All right, I've got no further questions. Councillor Potter.
Sorry, Madam Mayor. I just want to be clear, really, and I think get a response from the Chief Executive, perhaps the leader, in respect of Chapter 5 and the section that is covered from there on. I mean, I have to say up front, I mean, I really dislike some of the wording in this section. I mean, I understand the people that write these things and, you know, the sort of modern language that's used, but when it comes down to it, what this is all about is doing more for less, really. In terms of the main section at the bottom of page 33, transforming health and social care, we'll maximise our productivity potential and make a direct contribution to the £22 billion NHS gap. Well, that's an NHS funding gap, let that be very clear. It's not been funded properly, that's why the gap exists. And if that could be said very clearly, I think I'd welcome that. But what that really means is cuts, isn't it? I don't know what our contribution to reduce that £22 billion is going to be, but clearly that's what it means. We turn over the page, looking at page 34, just over halfway down, one of the subheadings, have cost reduction as its principal purpose through proposals that increase the provision of early intervention and prevention. I understand the thesis of that, but that's all based again around cost reduction. Just below that, developing a plan for health and social care outcomes. Again, we use the word locally. We will convene a conversation about how we can increase workforce capacity to meet growing demand for care.
Coming to a question.
Well, it's just why do we need to use this language? Let it be clear to the users of these services what we really are talking about. Because when we say workforce, we can increase workforce capacity, that either means we're going to employ more people to do it because there's an increasing demand. Well, I doubt that. What we really mean is we're going to squeeze more out of the care workers who currently work in primitive conditions at the present time. Yeah. That's what all this means, and I just wish it could be said by the writers of this sort of document.
Well said, buddy. Well said.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I think I would just build on the comments that clearly the challenge we have is that colleagues have come together to produce the document in partnership, but also the document is aimed at a particular audience in central government in terms of devolving more powers and responsibility to us. I don't imagine that we'd wish to use the same language if we were engaging directly with the public.
Thank you. Right, I have no further questions on this item, so we'll now move to Chapter 1, Case for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and I'll ask the Chief Exec to update us on from this morning. You'll get me into trouble.
Thank you. So in relation to Chapter 1, I think there's a sense from the paper, but also the discussion this morning, that we need to make sure that this is seen as a critical issue, which is why it deserves a focus, some sufficient focus on it. So there is a sense in which the system of local government financing through revenue support grant we know is being reduced year on year. Our Chief Finance Officer, I'm sure, will have the opportunity to comment in this part of the meeting, and I'm sure he will advise that the notice that we get from central government, although we build estimates of what we think we're going to get, come through fairly late in the day, which makes that year-on-year funding planning actually quite a difficult process. Having said that, trying to argue a position with central government that we should be left to our own devices in terms of retaining business rates is not without risk, and there was some discussion on that earlier in the meeting. And I think there is also a sense in which I think we need to make sure that we fully understand the implications here, because it's a very different way of operating. And I think there was a sense at this morning's meeting of just making sure that everybody understood potentially the words on the page, because it's one of those things where there are only a few words on the page and it's very easy for people to kind of pass over them, but it's a very significant proposition that we're putting to government in this regard. Absolutely masses of work would be required in order to look at this in terms of where the income would come from in terms of the different parts of the area. We are blessed with a strong economic base. We are blessed with having a significant number of businesses. Clearly that's not the same throughout the Hampshire and Isle of Wight area, and we would want to make sure that our position is no worse as we go through this process. And I think there's something about we can expect a major pushback from government in terms of let's have more money through retaining business rates than we get from grants at the moment. But that's how we're positioning the ask in the first instance, because we expect to get that pushback. So I think it's a significant proposition. Can I just make eye contact with my Chief Finance Officer in terms of whether he wants to make any additional comments before we invite questions on this, Mayor?
Happy to answer any questions as they occur.
Yeah, so he'll take questions as we go through, Mayor, if that's all right.
Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This chapter is headed "The Case for the Greater Hampshire and Isle of Wight." And I remind you, throughout the document, it only talks about Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. It's misleading. It is simply misleading. Page after page, it talks to Hampshire and Isle of Wight. The first line of the first chapter is the Greater Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. And I think we should have a comprehensive single definition. And it should not be Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, because that excludes Portsmouth and Southampton. Secondly, hey? I'll come to you later.
Is this a question or a statement?
Pardon?
It's a question or a statement?
Well, what do you like? What would you like?
I would like a question, because we are in the question
okay,
part.
Then.
Debate comes later.
I'll make the statement with the preface. Do you agree with me? So now we have a question. Sir, I haven't finished. The second thing that you need to understand very clearly, because I don't, is why you contrast everything with Manchester when you might know about what's happening in Manchester, but most of us in this room don't. Genuinely, we don't. And if you want to use that as evidence, you should produce the documentary evidence to enable us to make the assessment ourselves. Now, my colleague, Councillor Potter, has already said the case for the Greater Hampshire and Isle of Wight has not been made. I don't believe it has. Let me tell you why. And again, don't forget, do you agree with me? The structure of local government in Britain has been established by agreed processes across national political parties, including national academic research, including judicial and other bodies contributing to one standard for the UK. One standard. These cuts proposals are simply the engineering arrangement to implement the cuts in different ways. In 10 years' time, we won't have local government as we know it if we're going to have different organizations in different parts of the country, different makeup and different numbers, and we'll have national government, instead of pushing us back, they'll be eliminating us. So I don't believe that we have created a paradigm of local government which is sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, we have to suffer in the end. I understand what's happening and why it's happening, and I participated in the talks because I don't want it to be eliminated. But I just want to understand, I do not believe we have designed or are designing a correct paradigm for local government and local government involvement. So on that basis, I would ask you to take into account and take back to your discussions the Labour Party's document, because it's a serious document. Thank you. And again, I'll remind you, you might have forgotten, do you agree?
I'll answer the first point, the question about it being Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, or Greater Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. This was discussed at a very early stage by all the participating councils. They came to the conclusion that Hampshire is a well-known concept as a county, rather than administrative concepts of various boroughs or districts, and therefore it was decided, since Greater Hampshire has never existed anywhere alongside the idea of Greater London or Greater Manchester, we would just stick with the simple, well-known geographic description, because it's not actually talking about the case for Hampshire County Council, or the area covered by Hampshire County Council. It is purely talking about Hampshire is one county, the Isle of Wight, as they very proudly will always tell you, is another county, and it's just those two counties combined, in the same way that there's a discussion going. In fact, there's a three counties proposal going on with Surrey, Sussex and somewhere else at the moment. So that's the reason why it is that. I'm not going to enter into a discussion about what is the right paradigm for local government and the way it should be entered in, because that is not something which we can decide we will change ourselves. What we are talking about here is that the process of devolution is going on whether we might like it or not. It is going to happen. The government is in the process, and as you've heard earlier on from I think 24, 25 different proposals that are going to go forward. The question for us is, do we want to be part of that process and try and gain the benefits which might accrue to us, given all the caveats that there are about all the various problems that can arise as we go along the way? We may never get to the end of the process. We may decide that there are some red lines which we were required to cross, which we will not cross. But what we're not here to try and do is decide whether or not this is the right way that local government should be organised. It's just, do we want to carry on fighting our corner and making sure that we get as much as we can out of what potentially might be on offer? It's as simple as that. Yes, I mean, government obviously does know about Manchester. government. And therefore, this is a document which doesn't really need to tell them about that. We have had various bits of information. I think at the actual, we've had previously bits of information on exactly on the deal on Manchester. I'm very happy to supply it to you if you would like to have. I've got pages of booklets and various other prospectuses and things on Manchester. And of course, I've done my own research on it on the internet. But I'll let you have whatever you would like to have.
A question.
I'm answering a question at the moment. The situation seriously is not that I want to go through books and books and books and books. If we and all the people in the room that you saw this morning are all relying on evidence about Manchester, it won't be relying on books and books and books. It'll be relying on evidence provided to you. All I'm asking is, can we have the same evidence, please?
I think we can agree to provide whatever would be reasonably easily digestible. You can spend days, as I can assure you, on reading stuff on this.
Councillor Mrs. Cubitt.
Yes, Kevin very briefly touched on the rates retained, well, that are currently collected by the Hampshire and Isle of Wight of 705 million, of which we retained 265 and received 245. I just wonder whether we have a breakdown of how much of that 705 actually is generated from businesses within our borough.
About a bit, yeah. Basingstoke and Dean collects 75 million, so about 10.5%. Oh, well, it was on. It was on. Sorry, okay. Yeah, so Basingstoke and Dean collect 75, well, the latest figure, 75 million of the 705, so that's 10.5% of the business rates.
And in terms of the other boroughs that currently exist in their current construct, how does that compare? Are we the largest, or the second largest, or the third largest?
In terms of boroughs, so excluding the unitaries, we're second largest. New Forest, we're the largest. We're the largest, yeah.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On the bottom of page 53, of 53, page 11, there's one line that leads over the page. Power to precept and levy against constituent authorities for the purpose of raising productivity, exempt from the calculation of council tax referendum thresholds. Fascinating. What body are we creating that would need that power? What funding are we seeking to gain on top of council tax? What are we saying here? That the combined authority could levy on top of our council tax 5, 6, 7, 10%, and that they would not be obligated to do the council tax threshold referenda like we are? It's just interesting what is behind that particular line, that purpose, if we're not creating superior bodies, superior organisations that would require additional funding, supra ourselves as authorities. If we're combining our own people, that's one thing. If we're paying for strategic delivery plans, I presume that's going to pay some nice consultants to come in and do the job. Who gets to decide that? Who sets that? Where's the methodology behind it? And where's the democratic oversight over the top of it?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Well, I think we skipped over the governance section, which we're coming back to. So those questions about who, what body, how, those are all around the governance and the particular arrangements. As to what's behind this, it very particularly relates, or is worded to relate to productivity, and however that might be. That could be infrastructure, that could be other types of funding. So it's not meant to be a precepting power for general administration. It's meant for very specific purposes that would guarantee or would help give a funding stream that you could then either borrow against or use to leverage in funding to help the productivity. So it's a particular ask to be able to precept or to levy a council tax. The ask is also to exempt that from the referendum limits, because if it was a levy, then it would impact on the council that was levied, because it would be count against their own council tax proposals, as I'm sure you're aware. So it's a proposal that says give the body, whatever that body might be under the governance arrangements, the power to set either a precept or a council tax in effect for very specific purposes. And as we've sort of explained throughout the evening, there's an awful lot of work to do to say, well, what would those purposes be? What exactly is this power you're talking about? And the Chief Executive mentioned, government pushback. I think you can guarantee there'd be significant government pushback on this proposal.
Thank you, Kevin. I guess the point is we're asking for an infrastructure guarantee from government. We're asking them to stump up the billions while keeping in our back pocket a little bit of manoeuvre to say, actually, we'll stick 10% on council tax to pay for the infrastructure deficit that isn't big. So our council tax, our residents wind up picking up the bill for this, ultimately, in that context, if it isn't rearranged in the governance debate that will take place. And there's a lot of the detail here that isn't there. But we've got these lines in that are quite huge things. You're going out with a prospectus that's saying huge things where a lot of detail is not there.
Right, I have no more questions on this section, so we will move on to Chapter 6, page 38, with the big numbers. If I'll ask the Chief Exec just to update on that one.
Madam Mayor, nothing further added this morning, so as on paper, I think it's about saying that essentially if we are to continue in this process, we would need to undertake a review of governance to come up with a set of proposals that were workable. We talked about it earlier in the evening, about the important red line for Basingstoke and Deane is in relation to one leader, one vote. We don't see any distinction between tiers of local authorities, and clearly there will be issues to resolve if we do go forward about the role of local enterprise partnerships, the role of health and so on. But the way that government gives guidance to the formation of combined authorities is that if this is something that we would wish to pursue, we would undertake a governance review to look at all of these aspects.
Councillor Cousins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In respect of the opening sentence of Chapter 6, it says, of course, it will undertake a full governance review exploring all options, including a combined authority with a directly elected mayor. Now, approximately 10 years ago, the residents of Basingstoke rejected an elected mayor. Could the Chief Exec or the leader inform us, please, has that position now changed in regards to the administration, or how have they approached this element with their discussions?
I think we've taken exactly the same position as almost every other leader and every other authority has taken, is that we've tried to avoid the issue. And that there's a very simple reason for that. There is a very clearly laid down process that we have to go through in carrying out a governance review. It's virtually a statutory process that we can't avoid in carry out to get us to identify the various options that might be appropriate to what we want to carry out. So once you've got agreement on what it is that you want to do and would be permitted to do, would have agreement to do, whatever the correct phrase is, with government, then you have to look at what would be the right governance for carrying out those powers. I think I haven't found anybody yet who's in support of having a locally elected mayor, and by that we mean a Pan-Hampshire mayor. But it seems to be something to which the Chancellor is very closely wedded. At the end of the day, it will come back to saying, well, what are you going to offer us for having to put up with one or not? But he will actually have to look at the outcome of the governance review to identify whether one is necessary, given the kinds of things that we are actually wanting to sign up to do. And certainly you do have an example, and I'm sorry I haven't got the papers for this either, which is Cornwall, where they have arrived at a different solution to that. So the view that we've very much taken in putting this forward to government for consideration is we're not going to choke off anything at the moment that might say to them, well, if you're not having that, we're not even going to talk to them. We want to keep all options open, but there's clearly no commitment in this statement at all to anything.
I have no further questions. I nearly got there, didn't I? Councillor James.
Just a very quick question, seeking reassurance. Obviously, if we take it at the basic, it's going to be council leaders on this body. My understanding is 18 at the moment. That's one Labour councillor from Southampton, one Liberal Democrat from Eastleigh, 16 Conservatives. I'm not sure Portsmouth have a UKIP Labour Conservative coalition, so quite what they send, I don't know. That seems to be very much a single-party state. Now, if you're going to have tax-raising preset powers, where is the scrutiny to the decisions made by that body when you have such a limited range? Now, I know in the Police and Crime Panel, some effort was made to reflect the demographics, or democratics, if you like, of the county to make sure that additional representatives were put on, so that the body that scrutinises the work of the Police Commissioner is representative of what you see in wider Hampshire. Can you make sure, as these negotiations progress, that some plans are put in place to make sure there isn't a democratic deficit, we're not left with a single-party state, the proper proper scrutiny from elected officials can happen by having a balanced, whatever governance model you pick, that represents the views of wider Hampshire?
Absolutely. My understanding is that, in fact, the part of the governance review would be an analysis of what that situation would be if you were looking at it across Hampshire to avoid that. So much as I like the idea of a one-party state, and actually I've been, why have councillors? Let's just go for megalomania while we're at it. Absolutely. Come on, let's be honest about this. But I think, no, it's a very valid point, and it has worked out reasonably well, I think, on the Police and Crime Panel, that there is some balance there. It's a difficult issue to determine, particularly when it comes down to independence, because how can you have a group of independents by definition? You can't. But we have to find a means, because it is important that if there's any structure put in place, it has got to have the general support of the population of the area that it covers, the two counties. And without that, it would not have either viability, I think, or certainly it would not have a self-justification that's there. So let us, for the time being, I note the point. We will take it on board as we go forward.
Right, I really do have no further questions now. We are approaching 9:30, and we have come to the end of the question session. I will propose that we have a 5-minute comfort break. Can we also, before we do that, agree what time we'll go on till? 25 to 10. Any suggestions? Well, if people are getting twitchy, and I think a 5-minute comfort break would be beneficial. So if we say till 10:30 and review it at 10:30? Yeah, a 5-minute comfort break. Please be prompt. Please be seated. Right, quiet, please. We are going to carry on. The leader is going to introduce the paper before we go into debate.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I should be very brief because I think time is getting on and we've heard a lot on this. Just to remind you what the recommendations are, firstly, to note the submission to Government on the devolution deal prospectus for wider Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. How wide it got in there, I don't know. We'll take it out, so it shouldn't be there. I think the second one then, to endorse the local discussions on devolution of powers and responsibilities from Whitehall as a positive development in delivery of public sector services, and that myself and the Chief Executive should continue to work alongside colleagues in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight on the development of the model for devolution, which meets local needs. To pick up, to advise the leader of matters that they wish to bring to his attention regarding the contents of the deal, and considers in due course the outcome of the negotiations with government. I have really only a few brief points to make. I think this is, as I said right at the beginning, it was unfortunate this has come when it's come. It's not quite clearly has not given us the opportunity to debate things as long and as fully as we would wish to have done, and to discuss the concept as fully as we probably should have done. But nevertheless, we are where we are. This is a proposal to start talking. It is not a proposal that is to accept all of the points that are in the paper within the prospectus. I think it's so far so good is probably the best way one can put it. There are a lot of elements in here about which I have some concerns. There are a lot of elements in here which clearly we need much more detail before we can actually decide whether or not we can go along with them or not. But I do think that the value that we've had so far is being very closely engaged in those discussions, and it is far better to be inside the tent rather than outside the tent in going forward. I do think that the proposal as it stands lacks some ambition, it lacks some leadership, it lacks some inspiration within it, and I think that's largely because of the speed with which it's been put together. There hasn't been the time to really sit down and see if we could arrive at some quite radical proposals as opposed to an improved version of what we've got at the moment and an improved version of the same. That said, I think we've probably got as far as it was reasonable for us to have got at present. Now, we know that the whole question of devolution by government is something which they are firmly in favour of, but equally it is something that they are not going to impose. It is something for which we have to ask. We know that there are lots of other people wishing to ask for it. And we know also that those who get in first get a better deal. What you're being asked to note this evening and to endorse that we carry on doing is being part of this process in developing this proposition so that if at all possible we get in first or in the first wave for the benefit of the people that we serve, for our residents and for the wider population of Hampshire. I think it is the appropriate thing that we should be seen to be playing an active part in that. It would be, I think, unconscionable if we were to decide we didn't want to be part of it and then watch the whole process going on alongside us with no means of being involved in it or in taking part in it. It's not something which, strange enough, it's not something which is being driven on a party political basis. There's been really good cross-party support of the various council members who have been there, and I think we've all been contributing as equals in that process. And in doing so, we've recognised that none of us has a monopoly of deciding the way it should go, or the issues that should be of concern, or the points that need to be raised. So I will need all of your input going forward on various points that need to be taken into consideration. We may not all agree on those points for consideration, but it will be my responsibility to make sure that they are brought up in discussion to see whether they chime with other people in other areas. I need to have, therefore, that information being fed back to me. I am going to give serious thought, along with the Chief Executive, to how we can actually structure this so that there is a format of either of working groups on specific subjects, or how we can do it without the need to bring all 60 people back, as it would be, to discuss every line of the project as it goes forward. That, of course, will depend on exactly what comes back as the initial reaction from government. We could all be for putting this into the waste paper basket and forgetting about it in 2 weeks' time. I don't think that will happen. The indication from government is that they really want us to succeed because they actually believe that we can contribute a very large amount to the general wealth of the country by virtue of the size of our economy, the 47 million, I think it is, of GVA that we generate, and our ability to grow that. It's a GVA which is bigger than Wales. So it's an example of what they stand to get out of it in terms of, and we all stand to get out of it in terms of growth in wealth in the economy, and therefore I think it's something which we should be part and parcel of dealing with. So my recommendation, along with these other ones, very much to you is, for the time being, let's stay in. Nobody's asking you to decide anything finally at the moment, and you will always ultimately have the final veto when the time comes. So I would like to move, if I may, Madam Mayor, move the recommendations, and no doubt you will find a seconder somewhere, I hope.
Thank you. Have we got a seconder? Councillor Putty? Councillor Keith Watts, the question is this, or you're seconding? We've got a second.
I'm hoping to speak in the debate.
I believe somebody was going to ask a question on the document that was circulated earlier.
No, Madam Mayor, only you and I had that. They've moved away from that now, so
Oh,
we're
that-
just into debate now.
We're just into debate. Okay, so, right, so Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There can't be any country in the world that tinkers with its local government structure as much as this one does. Yep, I'm on there. It's not all for the good. I'm reminded of when President Eisenhower was in a panic and introducing new initiatives every week. You know, the great liberal Adlai Stevenson said, "Don't just do something, stand there." And there's quite a lot to say for that. I don't think this is devolution anyway. It's a different sort of local government reform. But devolution would be you have your own Home Office, for example. Going through recent history, the Heath government dealt with the Northern and Midlands powerhouse by creating elected metropolitan authorities. The Thatcher government's metropolitan counties, in fact. The Thatcher government scrapped those, and now we're coming round to finding another way of cobbling together something to do that. The Heath government also abolished county boroughs, so Portsmouth and Southampton came under the Hampshire umbrella, and Hampshire County Council grew and expanded. I don't think it ever shrank again. And then in the major government reintroduced unitary authorities, and Portsmouth and Hampshire went out again on their own. Incidentally, of course, after the metropolitan counties were abolished, the metropolitan boroughs were then effectively unitaries, not to be confused with the metropolitan boroughs that the Macmillan government had abolished when the London boroughs were introduced. And I don't know well if it's a particularly conservative thing, but a wish to play with local government as though it's a box of toys seems to pervade all these things. So I would say I'm sceptical. I might even say I'm cynical, but I'm sceptical about this. Nevertheless, I do think that we should stay in there. There's another quote. The great Conservative Speaker of the House of Commons, Bernard Wetherell, was asked why he continually called Dennis Skinner to speak. And he said, because he keeps turning up. And for me, the zeroth law of politics is to keep turning up. So although I'm extremely sceptical about this, and any particular issues I wish to raise I will have already done, but I do think we should stay in there and see how it's turning out.
Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This document has been like shifting sand, produced over a very short space of time. And when you have two large drafts within a week on devolution, a project that is so new to everyone and with such broad subjects, it's understandably difficult to assess. This whole process is moving so fast it would give the Jamaican relay team a run for its money. We seem to be in a race that local authorities up and down the country are still uncertain they want to be in. Central government has fired the starting gun and dictated the pace of this race to devolution. In an effort to try and keep up with it all, and the pursuit of what on the surface looks like some pretty big ticket items, special care should be taken to avoid dropping the baton. I look for a mention of double devolution, or even deeper devolution as it's now called, something we could actually control in our own neck of the woods and what could make life better for our residents. But all I could find were glimpses, again making it difficult to see what is actually on offer for this borough, and the difference in having the control to do something or having it done to you. Infrastructure and housing understandably features very highly in this draft document, along with boosting business and skills for work. But it's a real concern to see that although it mentions that transforming public services will be at the heart of these proposals, it's very disappointing they only appear towards the rear of the document, as low as number 5 on the list. It also talks about an ambition to reimagine services. Let's hope that doesn't lead us to imagine what they used to be like. The cynic in me wonders if the real reason for this rushed devolution offering from central government is not solely a mechanism for more severe cuts to local government and shifting the shoulder of blame for any future failings as a result of those cuts to a local level. The residents of Basingstoke would take a dim view if their public services were being threatened by this proposed devolution deal. One would hope that that is not the case and that some services could be devolved locally that would really make a difference and benefit the residents of this borough. It's interesting to note in this version of the document that there's still a discussion to be had surrounding the subject of an elected mayor. It's reassuring that all options will be explored, including other forms of democratic governance. To have all that power in one person's hands is something not many are comfortable with. And of course in 2012, when 10 cities held a referendum for electing mayors, only Bristol decided they wanted one. From my perspective, we should be looking to make sure that if this is to progress, there are certain situations whereby if the deal is not looking like it's in the best interests of our residents, that we have the ability to withdraw. This proposal is so much in its infancy in regard to what it can offer Basingstoke and Deane that it appears little more than some ideas and a wish list at present. So taking a suck it and see approach may be the only way forward.
Councillor Reagan.
Thank you, Mayor. Any reorganisation of local government with a giant bureaucracy should be for the benefit of people. And John could pick one specific item where it would not be. It seems to be that the idea to improve local bus services is you start charging older people on their bus passes. I will raise that. I mean, I do not believe there's been a survey and we asked them. I think it's when I go down to my local community centre, people ask me that are really pleased about their bus passes. No one's saying, you know, we should pay more on top of them. If there is a charge on top of the bus passes, that is a cut. And if you really want to fund local bus services, it's actually campaign, put pressure on government to get rid of the 1985 Transport Act, which deregulated buses and allowed stagecoach and the other big conglomerates to eat up all the bus services and then cut back and just run on commercial routes, then ripping the taxpayer off to subsidise the routes they won't run. That is the problem. So please leave, and I hope the Gazette are noticing, please leave old age pensioners bus passes alone. Because I'll tell you one thing, the Labour Party will be proposing any cuts to bus passes.
Councillor Keating.
Sorry to correct you, Madam Mayor. I didn't have my hand up for this particular section.
Oh, sorry, I passed your name. Councillor Cousins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I would like to move an amendment to the recommendations in front of us tonight. Members will be pleased to hear that it's a relatively small recommendation, one that I hope that the leader and members across all parties will embrace, because it aims to have our views as members fed into the leader more strongly, which I believe from the leader's contribution is something that he would like to hear, receive and act upon. So with this amendment, Madam Mayor, I will leave points 1 and 2 as they are. Point 3 will change to that the leader is required to take the issues and concerns raised by Council forward in the negotiations on the combined authority and regularly reports back to full Council. Point 4 would simply remove the words "in due course."
Could you just repeat number 3 again to make sure we've got it correctly?
Absolutely, Madam Mayor. That the leader is required to take the issues and concerns raised by Council forward in the negotiation on the combined authority and regularly reports back to full Council.
Is that seconded? It's seconded. Any debate on the amendment?
I'll have a debate with myself if I may.
Yes, you may.
I have absolutely no objection other than to note that he obviously doesn't trust me that I would report back to full Council. But putting that to one side, or that in fact full Council is necessarily the right venue to reporting back. I'm very happy, if you would like to hear from me so frequently, to put in an update on where we are at each session of full Council. But I would actually be wanting to report back rather more frequently than that at other stages. And I'm really not quite sure what the in due course coming in or staying out, what difference it makes, quite frankly, because it doesn't define when you might actually consider it. So I think that second part of the amendment is unnecessary, but I don't really feel terribly worked up about it.
Anybody else? Any other debate? Put that on the amendment.
So we can put that to the vote if there's no.
Is that on the amendment?
Yeah, yes, it is on the amendment.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just wondering if there was a particular reason, as the leader said, why Councillor Cousins would like that it taken out. If there's, yeah.
The reason why we would like to remove the words "in due course" is that we feel it's a bit fluffy, in the terms that we feel it could be construed that it could push things into the long grass, and we want to remove that element of doubt. So that's why we are removing the words "in due course." It is purely as simple as that, that we don't want it to be pushed into the long grass.
All right, now can we vote on the amendment? I'm just saying, we'll move to the vote. Are we doing it electronically?
Oh, God, no.
No,
Do it
okay.
by agreement.
Do it by agreement. All those in favour of the amendment? Anybody against? Got to be fair.
Councillor Harvey wishes to speak. Have you finished all your speaking?
No, not yet.
Right,
We've got quite a few more speakers. So, Councillor Gavin James, next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you very much for the way you've chaired this evening. It's been very informative. I've learned much more, and I'm perhaps slightly less sceptical than I was before the question and answer session. So, well done for you for that, and thanks to the Chief Executive for answering the questions so fully. I have to say that when we started on this journey, I believed it to be localism, and I've always been a big fan of localism. Unfortunately, it does seem to have changed slightly. The government are dictating the pace, the government are dictating the agenda, and we seem to be working towards a Tory party conference. That's not localism, that's a disaster. The document talks about economic growth, and I think it's perhaps slightly ambitious in that regard. We face an ageing workforce. Delivering that growth requires accelerating house building, and earlier drafts, although it's been watered down, talk about needing a lot more immigration in order to fulfil the jobs to sustain that economic growth. I don't remember many people campaigning in Basingstoke for higher house building and higher immigration. I looked at that side in particular. I've got most of their leaflets, and none of them seem to mention it. So I add that caution there. The document talks about building on our successful partnerships. I think that's possibly the wrong choice of words. I think maybe developing some successful partnerships may be a better way forward. If we talk about increasing the workforce, means making sure that our young people are kept in housing, employment and education. It talks about needs in the document. To achieve that, you need a gold standard in youth services, connections and supporting people services. These are the exact same services that Hampshire County Council have been busy cutting for the last few years. We can no longer allow residents to be cut off from employment opportunities due to poor public transport. That means providing subsidies to support better bus services. Again, the exact same services that Hampshire County Council have been cutting. In fact, we look like we're creating a whole new authority just to fix the mess that Hampshire County Council have made. It means providing sufficient affordable housing so those who start their careers can afford to live here, can afford to stay here. That's the opposite to the direction that many on that side of the chamber have been arguing, where they've been trying to force lower building numbers, and it's taken 7 years to persuade them to get to an evidence-based figure. I think we need to take a reality check as well, especially when we're promising government great economic growth. I go back to the ageing population. To sustain economic growth is going to be very difficult when you consider more people will be retiring over the next 20 years than will be leaving our schools and colleges. I think the threat to government has to be that we can't carry on being the prosperous county we have been. We cannot keep providing to the economy in the manner we have been, because it's resulted in us having a significant infrastructure deficit. What it does clearly demonstrate is that two-tier authorities, the current system, is unable to rise to the challenge of the future, which is why I welcome and encourage ongoing debate. Carrying on as we are is not an option. We cannot sustain growth without the infrastructure and the ability to develop dynamic services that respond to the individual needs of the borough. I think everything else was answered in a question, so I support ongoing discussion and debate, but I would ask Councillor Sanders to sit very close to the exit door, so if he doesn't get his way, he can get out quickly. Because at the moment I have more concerns over the risks that I don't think have probably been addressed, and I share Councillor Westbrook's concern that the primary purpose of us as elected local authority members is to provide services to our residents. When you look at this document, services is right down the back end of the agenda. It's been beefed up since earlier drafts. There's actually something more substantive on it, and I've made this comment throughout discussions we've had in group leaders meetings. At least there's something there now, but I still think it needs to be higher up the agenda, because if you look at the Chapter 1, when it talks about all the economic growth, services hardly gets a mention, and I think that should be critical to what we go to central government with, because that's what our residents expect, and localism is about doing what residents want, not doing what government wants.
Thank you. Councillor Joe Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm reminded tonight of the apocryphal story of King Canute, which I know Southampton has some claim to, so we'll consider it relevant in that sense. King Canute can stand on the shore as long as he wants. That's okay. He can bury his head in the sand. Probably means that he'll get drowned quicker, but that's fine too. no, this is not going to be imposed on us by government, and no, this isn't a perfect document. But we have an opportunity, and I believe we owe it to our residents, to explore a positive way forward, to be part of the conversation, and to actually try and shape something for the benefit of our residents. And that's what we've got to move forward with tonight.
I believe that's Councillor Smith's maiden speech. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just like to remind people, this is a strategic document. It's one of the first words that the leader said when he started to speak. Also, the title of it is a prospectus. It's not a final document. It's not the definitive document. And I think that message has been tried to be put across tonight. Yet there have been many people here who have been speaking about low-level detail. You can't put low-level detail in documents like this. This is a starter for 10. And I quite agree that we need to continue to participate in the negotiations. If you don't keep talking, you'll never get what you want. The last thing we want to do is get left on the cold. And also be aware that how powerful we are within this group of 15 councils, I believe. So we do have an influence. If we have an influence, we've got to hang in there. One thing I do have a bit of concern about, and I've already talked to the leader about this, it'll come later on, but there's an awful lot of promise in this document. My concern is the governance and the organisation of how it's going to be implemented. We don't know yet. I'm a little concerned to think of the organisation of the tiers of councils, of the unitaries. I don't know what's going to happen to the unitaries, whether they disappear or not. But I have a little bit of a concern if the county council is going to be doing what it's doing at the moment. So I think the governments and oversee, if you like, of all this extra money coming in and how it gets distributed is going to be an important element. I think we'll see that come through the negotiations as we go forward, and it depends how the pointers from government come back to us once this submission goes in at the end of the week. I fully support this, and we should be continuing to dialogue with our fellow councils. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a Jekyll and Hyde kind of report, really, because there's bits in it that many of us could support, and there's bits in it that many would disagree, and I'm sure that's reflected across the political spectrum. And I think the issue becomes, what are we actually about in this? What benefit does this really bring to people living in Basingstoke and Deane? That's the bottom line. And if we're talking about devolution, what we do not want to see is a devolution of cuts from the government. What we don't want them to see is, here's the powers, but here's 10% less to do it. Here's the powers, but you then take the responsibility for implementing the cuts we're now telling you to make. If it's genuine localism and genuine devolution, then it comes with the responsibility for the local authorities that are involved and the partners that are involved to deliver on a level playing field. If government squares the pitch from the beginning, we do nobody a service. We do not do our residents a service by accepting that. So there's an awful lot of negotiation to go on and an awful lot of hard dealing to be done as the cities and other areas of the country have faced when doing similar things, and they have not been easy things, and they have not always delivered deals that have benefited the local communities. They have sometimes been compromises that have gone too far, and that is a very difficult balance to strike, particularly when we start talking about elected mayors and we start talking about authorities being created above local government and above councillors. Where's the democracy? Where's the accountability? And where is something that we've always said has been an issue with county? How remote it is from our borough. County is remote. How remote do we think this combined authority is going to be from us as well? We have to bring this back to us and back to our residents. So from our point of view, from the things that we're arguing for, that I'm sure others are arguing for as well, how do we go about retaining and growing local businesses that address the issues that companies face locally, as we now see this week in the press? How do we address those concerns those companies have and keep them in Basingstoke and keep the jobs here? How do we address the skills issues where it does not just talk about a conveyor belt and turning education into a skills conveyor belt. We need to be more broad and more intelligent than that in how we address those issues. How do we deal with the issues that we've always raised? The empty retail units in the top of town, all of that reflects on our economy, all of that reflects on how we take our local economy forward as part of this greater thing that you are discussing. On housing, how in the world do we genuinely meet local need and stop a developer free-for-all? We haven't answered those questions this evening, and they are the biggest questions this borough faces because we have consistently failed to address them in the local plan. I suspect we will consistently fail to address them through the local plan inspection, and the problem will stay there. We do not need to exacerbate it by giving into agreements and deals by government pushing the agenda as hard as they are without securing benefit to our residents, which means truly affordable housing that local people in Basingstoke and Deane can genuinely afford. We come back to the age-old question, who are we building all these houses for? And as far as the infrastructure guarantee goes, it's only worth the document signed by a Secretary of State for as long as they're Secretary of State. How many times have bits of road been taken in and out of government plans? We need a guarantee worth its name, and in that, not something that closes the door after we've built all the houses. You know, not something that comes along after we've done all the house building and says, now we'll put the infrastructure in. This has got to be far more joined up, and these are genuine challenges. I think there is an issue within the report about tackling issues of poverty, inequality and deprivation in our borough. Where is the regeneration agenda in this? It might be there in the language you've used, but are using it for the purposes of government and meeting a Tory government's language like you would do any particular government, but nonetheless meeting their language, rather than talking to our residents. Because those are issues that are really important to them, how we address poverty, inequality, and in particular, how we address the regeneration agenda. Public transport, well, you know, how can we deal with the issue of putting profit before passengers, which we see? And it's as much for the commuters on the trains as it is for the passengers on the buses. And finally, what I do find disappointing is there is no mention anywhere in here that I can genuinely positively see of an environmental agenda, of something that tackles both power and waste and recycling across the whole of the area that would actually be quite a profound win for us. I don't see that. Maybe it is in there, but I've missed it, but I have not seen it in the document. And I think that is important as a major policy area, a major plank of policy that a combined authority could address. There's so much in here we don't see, and I think there's far more questions to be answered. But if we're going to go forward, let's try and be positive and work together on it.
Right, Councillor Frost, you are my last speaker, so I'm closing the list there, and then I will ask the leader to sum up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to thank the Chief Exec, the leader, and our good officers for what actually is, I think, a very good strategic draft paper, which has been put together in a very short time constraint. So thank you very much. I think that whilst it's lacking some of the obvious detail which would normally be put into a plan, it is a good paper, and I think that you know, that I'm not quite sure about what the shape of the new authority could possibly be, but all I know is I want the best for my residents. I want the best for my residents, as I think everybody here does, and so therefore I want the Chief Executive and I want the leader to continue negotiating on our behalf within this project, because I do honestly believe we've got to be in it to win it. So please keep negotiating, and I look forward to receiving details and regular updates in due course, knowing fine well that if the deal isn't good for our residents, we can always back out at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask the leader to sum up now.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm not going to underestimate, and I wouldn't underestimate to you, the difficulties of what we're trying to do here, or to try and claim that we will succeed. I don't know whether we're going to succeed. I think there are a lot of issues that I can see from a Basingstoke point of view which will cause real concerns that we will need to iron out as we go forward. There are 14 other people who will have maybe some of the same concerns, but maybe additional concerns from different perspectives on this. Trying to bring it all together, and we mustn't forget the government, I suppose, in that they will probably have concerns too. Trying to bring it together is going to be very difficult. I don't know where it will lead in the end. It may be that I will finish up not voting for it in the end, but I at least want to try and approach it with an open mind. This document, as it stands, is a document, let's be clear about it, is not a party manifesto, it's not a document for residents. It's a document being written to be read by ministers and to be read by civil servants. That's what this is. This is a letter to them. It even starts, "Dear Ministers." And as you know, when talking to them, you don't necessarily normally use the land of the living. You have to use some other kind of terminology that gets employed at that particular kind of case. But I think it does put most of the points there relatively succinctly and relatively strongly. There are other issues which one would like to bring in, but there are, I think, very clear guidelines that what they don't want to hear is just more of what we should already be doing. What they want to know are what are the new initiatives, what are the new possibilities that we can be doing. There are other opportunities to go forward. We just have to remember that this is not planned to change the rights or responsibilities of any council, of any local authority. It is to enable them to combine together with government for a better result. And therefore, none of the responsibilities that we have for looking after our residents' concerns, which we should quite properly be dealing with, are taken away from us. We still have to concentrate on those areas, and I have to say it would be great to try and get back to the day job, having spent so much time on this over the last few weeks. So with that, I would firmly recommend the amended resolution, including, I've never been called fluffy before, but never mind, including the very strange amendment in point 4. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Do members want to be reminded of the amendment? Or is everybody clear? Everybody in favour of the recommendation? Anybody against? Thank you, members. I think we can declare the meeting closed. Thank you all very much for your patience.